Hi, everybody. Will you please join me in the Serenity Prayer? God, grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Step 5 in our book, the section on it, which is about 2.5 pages, is just gorgeous. And it talks about alcoholics leading a double life, crushing down, waking up, realizing this horrible stuff I've done, and then crushing it down. And then it says something to me that's very important. It says, this made for more drinking. It doesn't say it made for drinking. The reason why that's important to me is I have one core issue. My core issue in Alcoholics Anonymous is that I have alcoholism, and my primary purpose is to carry the message in to help other alcoholics. The other things that sometimes I hear about the men I sponsor talk about as core issues, they might very well be core issues in their psychology and other things, but they're not their core issue as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not saying that they're not important. They might be extremely important. But if it was a core issue, that means if my family problems were a core issue for me in AA, that means I could go to therapy, work out my family problems, and not have a drinking problem. One of the things that another symptom of over-sober for me is when people would say, well, I drank because of this. I drank when I was sad, or I drank when I was acted like a miserable parent or a miserable son. And I would think, well, that's not why you drank. But you know what? They're telling the truth. That's why they drank. Here's the missing piece. It's not why I can't stop drinking. So I've jettisoned the idea that that's not why they drank. I drank. I drank when it was miserable. I drank when it was good. Lots of people drink, but that's not why I can't stop drinking. I can't stop drinking because of this horrible alchemy, this mix of these three elements that have conspired to put me in a situation where I've been plucked outside of the opportunity to be helped by well-meaning members of the clergy, well-meaning therapists, medical doctors, loving family, etc. So that's a really key part of this for me in step 5 when it says that this made for more drinking. It says that I go ahead, I unearth these things, I turn over each stone, and the thing that has been extremely important for me and valuable is that this happens within the confines of the inventory for me. I read my resentments, I read my defects of character, my fears, and my sexual misconduct, and I read all of this. And the sexual misconduct, it's funny, they ask us to write on those 7 different points, and it says to put them all down. It doesn't say, but in connection with alcoholism, it doesn't ask me if the moon was full and the Chablis had a blush. It just asks where I've been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate. In other words, and I write about that. How was I doing? What kind of lies did I tell? You know, when I left my wife for another woman before I got sober, what should I have done instead? Well, people fall out of love. People get divorced. People start other relationships. That's part of life. We know that in the big world. So what I should have done instead was not, I never should have started another relationship. It was very simply, I never should have done both things at the same time because it injured a lot of people. That's the kind of man that I want to be. I want to be able to expose myself to the truth despite the consequences. And sometimes I act in a way where everyone won't be happy. I left my sponsor and my home group at 10 years of sobriety. We had just a great talk at lunch, and it was really one of the worst things that's ever happened to me. I felt like my skin was removed. And all of my governors on what was the right or wrong thing to do in sobriety and whether or not I was taking a step toward a drink or away from it was gone. And it was also important for me to do it. There was some stuff happening there that I'm just not going to go into that it was really important for me to get away from. And my relationship with my sponsor had become unproductive and injurious. You know, this 12-step work, this involvement in Alcoholics Anonymous can be very difficult and very taxing at times. My sponsor said to me, at the end of the day, despite the fact that it's difficult and taxing and at times very unpleasant, at the end of the day, it should be pleasurable and comforting. And at the end of the day, if it's not pleasurable and comforting, in the long run, then what am I doing? Then I got gray tunnel sobriety. Trudging down a gray tunnel. Once a year, a cake comes down. I blow it out and I just keep trudging, That sounds like fun. Let me tie a 5-pound sack of flour to my face while we're at it, It's just being a member, a friend of mine used to call it the frozen chosen, and it's just, I really like having a good time. One of the most misquoted and abused lines in the Big Book of AA is I've heard people say, my worst day in here is better than my best day out there. No. I had a great time out there. Let's see, a pound of cocaine in an all-female jazz band or a panel at the prison. I don't know. What do you want to do? What the guy at the that just slipped out. Okay, I've never thought of those things. I picked him up in my reading. What the guy at the end of chapter 3 says is something really wonderful. He says at the end of chapter 3 is, I wouldn't trade my worst day in here for my best day out there, because I wouldn't trade this way of life. I won't act like a sap anymore. I won't settle for a nickel today when I could have a quarter tomorrow. I just won't do it. That makes good sense to me, So let me just take a quick look at these things before we move into this session. There's a suggestion, and I've heard of this book now, and I want to read it. It's called The Hiding Place. It's about a Dutch Christian thrown in a Nazi concentration camp. And I believe the guy in the book actually lives in Southern California. At any rate, it's a great book about forgiveness. I've heard about it, and I want to read it. What a great question. Is there an action that goes with I forgive, him or her? Funny you should ask. The method of forgiving is this. Now, I was resentful at my first sponsor for injuring me, and I wrote about it, and I'm going to get more into this in the 10-step. I'm going to really talk about this at great length at the 10-step. But I'll read you the thing that M.F. Fox writes, and then I'm going to get into the details of it later on. The method of forgiving is this. Get by yourself and become quiet. Repeat any prayer or treatment that appeals to you. Read a chapter. He says read a chapter of the Bible. You could read a chapter of the Big Book, whatever, right? Then quietly say, I fully and freely forgive X. I loose him and let him go. I completely forgive the whole business in question. As far as I am concerned, it is finished forever. I cast the burden of resentment upon the God within me. He is free now, and I am free too. I wish him well in every phase of his life. That incident is finished. The truth has set us both free. I'd thank God. Then get up and go about your business. On no account repeat this act of forgiveness, because you have done it once and for all. And to do it a second time would be tacitly to repudiate your own work. Afterward, whenever the memory of the offender or the offense happens to come into your mind, bless the delinquent briefly and dismiss the thought. I say, I'm forgetting that I forgave him. I'm forgetting. And touch it like a feather on a bubble. Just touch it lightly and move on. And for me, if it nags and persists, then I'll write about it again and humble myself to another alcoholic and see what demonstration I can make. Because you know that when we resent, we are tied to that person as if by a steel cable. A jailer needs two people. It needs a prisoner and a jailkeeper, and they're both in prison. Baba Ram Das, a great old acid head and spiritual teacher, Richard Alpert, great guy, used to teach, he might still teach meditation in prison. And one time he was teaching, and he said to these prisoners, if you meditate, the only people that here will be in prison will be the guards. Do this however many times the thought may come back. After a few days, it will return less and less often until you forget it altogether. How many times have we seen things that would be unsolvable, and we surround them with the light, and after a while it gets starved out through seemingly disconnected and unrelated actions? It's a war of attrition. It gets starved. Then perhaps after an interval, shorter or longer, the old trouble may come back to memory once more. But you will find now all bitterness and resentment have disappeared, and you are both free with the perfect freedom of the children of God. Your forgiveness is complete. You will experience a wonderful joy in the realization of the demonstration. Our book says sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They'll always materialize if we work for them. All right? Now, I think any member who has been in AA for an appreciable amount of time can testify to the fact that they used to have hatreds that are out of their life completely. And in many of our cases, certainly in me, there are certain ones that have been persistent and nagging and very difficult. And sometimes God uses what I want most to rope me in, And I've had to take a look at those until my back has been broken by them. In the case of my sponsor, I wrote about it, I read it, I wrote about it, I read it. I wrote about it, I read it, and I wrote about it, and I read it until it just fell apart. And my new sponsor, finally said to me, "So you've done everything." I said, "Everything." He said, "You've done everything except forgive him." And I was confused. I didn't know that it was mine to dispense. I didn't understand forgiveness. I thought if I forgave you, it meant I was telling you you were wrong, which to me was antithetical of my whole spiritual treatment. I thought I needed to take responsibility for these things. I didn't understand that to forgive you was to forgive you for a perceived wrong. I don't know if you were wrong. Again, some things really are wrong. Some things are not excusable, but they have to be forgivable. And if I say I am absolutely willing to accept the fact that you're spiritually ill, then my world gets a lot bigger. Because if I deny you the ability to act the way you're acting, and I do that with enough people, then I wind up in Scott Redmond land, which is like a psychological theme park. It's a terrible place to live. There's a lot of lights, and it's very shiny and very bizarre. So there is an action, and that goes with forgiven. Thank you so much for asking me that, and I just read from a copy from Emmett Fox's book. Okay, got this. When my daughter was 5, she told me, "You are too mad for what I did." Oh, isn't that just incredible? You are too mad for what I did. It took me 8 more years of drinking and several years of sobriety to learn from this. Oh, that is just so gorgeous, so gorgeous. Toddlers are a great expression of alcoholism in terms of their self-centeredness. And I just want to tell one of my favorite toddler self-centered stories because it reminds me of alcoholics. My wife runs a progressive nursery school, play-based nursery school, extraordinary place. And she approaches these 2 little girls. They're both 3. And one is Nicole and one is Jane. And they're both drawing pictures. And Nancy walked over and looked over their shoulders and said, "Oh, Jane, that is such a beautiful picture. Jane, you have such a wonderful color in there. Jane, that is so lovely." And Nicole looked up at her and said, "Oh, Nancy, you're calling me Jane." I don't know. It doesn't get any better than that. It was just a silly mistake. She was complimenting somebody else. Could you expand on what the categories are for step 4 and give a full example about what an inventory entry might look like? What? Yes, I can. I talked through resentment pretty good. I'm resentful at Scott for being a bad father. It affects my self-esteem, pocketbook, ambition, personal relations, and sex. Now, it might not affect all those, but in this case it does. And that's SPAPS, self-esteem, pocketbook, ambition, personal relations, and sex. And that's 65 and 66. And then the fear image, and that's section 1. Resentment and defects of character that feed the resentment and make them possible. Brought to you by. And then the fear list is simply, I am frightened of, and write the fear not in connection with personal resentment. Sometimes I write a fear, I realize that it is connection with personal resentment, and it'll swing me back to the resentment inventory. And then I write on the 7 points. I left my wife for another woman before I got sober, where the names on the people are on the top of the page. Who was injured? My wife, the other woman, her family, the people at work. It was a workplace deal, our children, me. Top of the page. Where was I selfish? I'm not going to go into great detail on this, but I write about where I was selfish. I wanted to have both women. I wanted the whole thing for me. I wanted to be a big shot at work. I write about where I was selfish, dishonest. Well, I lied to my boss. I didn't, disclose that this was going on. I was dishonest to my workmates because I was doing special things for this woman in the workplace and cheating them out of my time and attention and goodwill. Where was I dishonest? I was lying about my intentions to both women, and I write about how I did it. I was dishonest to my children because I really wasn't showing up as the whole dad. There were pieces I had to leave behind because of my incredible self-loathing and hatred for others. Tough to know which was winning at that time. Dishonest, selfish, dishonest, inconsiderate. I wasn't being considerate of my workmates, of my boss, of my employers, of the people who had invested in the project. I wasn't being considerate of, I could go into each one of these buckets and talk about how I wasn't considerate to this woman's parents because she was watching them suffer and seeing her being tossed around in the tempest of this thing. Selfish, dishonest, inconsiderate, unjustifiably aroused jealousy. Well, I created jealousy in both of the women. I created jealousy at the workplace because the workmates were jealous of the attention she was getting. And I was jealous of people I felt weren't in my bind. I was jealous of people I thought had normal lives and were moving through them with some degree of grace that I certainly wasn't. Suspicion. I became suspicious of my own sanity. I became suspicious of all of my intentions. I didn't know what to believe about myself. I certainly created suspicions in my sons because they lived now in even a more disrupted and unsure landscape. And again, I could make a case for how I created suspicion in this woman's family. Was she going to be mistreated and go up, at any rate. Jealousy, suspicion, bitterness. Well, I created bitterness in all of them, and I wrote about that. Eventually turning away from this woman, turning back to my family. Not that that was any great shakes for my family by that time. I was sort of the booby prize at that point, I want him, I've got him. It's like having a flaming bag of dog shit left on your doorstep. At any rate, and I talked about the bitterness, how I injured this woman, I injured the project I was working on, and I could talk about some degree of injury. What should I have done instead? I should have never done both things at the same time. I should have acted like an employee who was showing up and giving them a dime for their nickel and not cheating them out of money. Stealing money, really, if I'm squandering their resources. And I wrote what I should have been doing instead. So that's a pretty succinct overview of the inventory, the 3 buckets, and how I make entries. Okay. I read it in step 5, and then I sat down and I did steps 6 and 7. I went over my defects of character. I had a conversation with God about them. I talked about them. I read the 1-page piece in the Big Book of AA, and I went through each individual one, and I said, Pop, please remove this terrible fear. Please remove this terrible mind reading. Father, please remove this terrible people pleasing. Father, please remove this fear of confrontation. Father, please remove this self-centeredness. Father, please remove this self-seeking. Father, please remove this unwillingness to accept spiritual sickness in myself. Please remove this unwillingness to accept spiritual sickness in one of God's kids. And when I did the big inventory, sometimes men I sponsor will come to me and they'll say, they'll be working on a 4th step and they'll say, oh, this hurts so much. Can I just come over and read you what I got? And I ask them not to. The book doesn't say write a little, read a little, write a little, read a little. They encourage you to read the whole thing because perhaps you will be so crushed under the weight of it. The demonstration of the illness will be so overwhelming that you'll be so deflated of ego at depth that something supernatural will happen to you. Where this ego, this desire for separation, this incredible war, this personal war to somehow be special, individuated, and to feel like the ego is contained and, standing up in the face of this big, brutal, horrible world, will be deflated enough for me to actually, and maybe it's at first just being connected to my sponsor. I don't know. Maybe in some way this little kernel, this little breeze can move through this death lock this spiritual corner I've painted myself into, that's why I see a great value of saying I'm resentful at a couple of 100 times. I am frightened of 50 times. And the terrible evidence of this sexual inventory, of really going into the bones of how I have trespassed in these areas and what I've injured and stuff. And a guy once said to me, he wanted to get it on with the newcomer. And he asked me what I thought of it. And I said, well, you know what? Don't get it on with the newcomer. Instead, try something instead. Go to a hospital, go to ICU, and find a woman on life support and unplug her from her machines and have sex with her, and then plug her into the machines again. It's the same thing. And he went, and he was so glad he had asked me that question. And I think it's kind of like standing at the doorway of a hospital and welcoming people and saying, you know, I'd really like to get it on with you before you get in there and, you know, get your treatment. I wish I could spit it out some other way, but that's just the way it seems to me. Although, again, I judge no man, because I'm so spiritually developed. But that being said, I think a lot of people can testify to the fact that I know people who started going out when they were really new, who've been married for 30 years. So, I mean, I know people who have found themselves. I'm not saying that happened to Beverly, by the way. I'm just looking at her because I love her. But matter of fact, you dated George when he was new, I think, didn't? No? No, okay. So I don't think, I just don't believe there are any hard and fast rules, but I certainly think that it's something, because it says in our book, if we're not sorry for this and we continue to do it, we're quite sure to drink. Wow, what do they mean? It just doesn't seem to be very mystical to me. If I continue to do this and I continue to injure people, I'm quite sure to drink. So that was my 6 and 7 on my defects of character, and my 6 and 7 with fear, I love. I want to share it with you. It's on page 67, 68. And I jump around a little bit, something my sponsor shared with me, and it's been a great, great help to me. On the bottom, right above now about sex, in the last sentence, it says, we ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us be. At once we commenced to outgrow fear. The paragraph above it, the last 2 sentences say, we are in the world to play the role he assigns just to the extent that we would do as we think he would have us and humbly rely upon him. Does he enable us to match calamity with serenity? So the prayer that my sponsor gave me was, Father, please remove this fear of. Okay, I don't know what it is. Could be fear of confrontation, could be fear of animals. I had a terrible fear of animals when I got sober. Fear of the dark, whatever it is. Turn my attention to what you would have me be, which means, what's your plan? The Scott Redmond plan is be terrified. That's clearly a Scott Redmond plan, okay? Now, I want to tell you also that I have a lot more colors on my palette now than I did when I got sober. I had just a few, you know. I had terror and coma. That was pretty much it. I didn't have a lot of gray area in between. And now I have fear, I have excitement, nervousness, reasonable anxiety. When a shark swims toward me, I don't have fear, I have alarm. There's a big difference between the two. One of them is a spiritual sickness, and one of them is smart, you know. Also, excitement. Early on, I misinterpreted that as fear. Maybe it was because I made so much about everything about me that I could easily make it into, into fear instead of just excitement. Sometimes people ask me if I get scared before I speak, and at this point I can honestly say no. I get excited, which is fun. I'm kind of an excitement junkie. I like that a lot. Whee! Yeah, I like that. But it's not fair. So, dear God, please remove this terrible fear of animals. Turn my attention to what you would have me be. In other words, God's plan is not for me to be scared. And it doesn't say I walk through all my fears. That's a real Arnold Schwarzenegger-ish kind of idea, that I always have to walk through my fear. In this case, the voice said, stay away from animals. It didn't say go buy a puppy. It didn't say anything like that. It said, just stay away from them. And then it says, I humbly rely upon you, which means I'm actually going to follow the suggestion. Okay? Because a lot of times, you see, the last sentence of the sexual inventory, 6 and 7, it says the right answers will come if I want them. And a lot of times, I don't want them. Like I was 320 pounds, and I'd say, I'm resentful at Scott for being overweight. It affects my self-esteem, pocketbook, ambition, personal relations. What are the defects? I'm self-serving. I'm not letting anything feed me except me. I'm experiencing all of this stuff, this miserable stuff, and I read it to somebody else, and then I have a pie and a bowl of spaghetti. I repeat the same thing. I don't, and I'm, and the voice said to me, go to OA. And I'd go, yeah, okay. What else you got? Because I'm a circuit speaker. I have no business doing that. I'm too spiritually developed, And I continued to suffer. And then I would write about it. The right answers will come if I want them. I would say, go to OA. So I go to OA. And I say, I'm a circuit speaker. And they said, yes, and a very fat circuit speaker. And I said, well, would you like me to talk? And I said, no. And your mouth's full, so it's not polite. I humbly rely upon you. And sometimes the answers will come, and I don't want them. And I say, what else you got? God, reach into your bag of tricks, God. And what else you got? And God's going to go, oh, we didn't like that. Oh, shit. Let me see what else I got. There's got to be something else in here. Dear Father, please remove this terrible fear of animals. Turn my attention to what you would have me be. Stay away from animals. I stayed away from animals. I humbly rely upon you. That's the 6 and 7 movement for me with the fear inventory. And I was at a conference, at the Brazos conference. Who was I talking to about that? Yeah. I was at that conference at Brazos, and a puppy ran up to me. And I realized I wasn't scared anymore. I embraced this puppy and played with him and had the time of my life that weekend. And I was sober a long time. But I had just stayed away from animals, And it happens when I'm not looking at it in the middle of the night, in between breaths, when I'm not even focusing on it. Anytime a guy I sponsor says that he's working on himself, I want to go, step away from yourself, sir. Step away from yourself. Put your hands on the car and step away from yourself, please. My disease reacts so poorly to a frontal assault. It always has, And I'm not saying that I can't act with purpose and with deliberation about things that I want to be rid of. I'm not saying that at all. But when I'm working on myself, it's one drunk talking to himself. And nothing ever good has happened in my life because of that. So that's how, and then 6 and 7 about on the sexual inventory are beautifully described in the last 2 paragraphs on page 69. In this way, we try to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our ideas and help us to live up to them. What a beautiful partnership. What a living, breathing relationship. Mutual, intimate relationship with God. We asked God to mold our ideas and humble it. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given good and therefore God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised or loathed. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answers will come if we want it, not if we like it. I'm going to talk more about 6 and 7 and how it has presented for me as part of the 10th step. Step 8 and 9, except for step 12, which is outlined in an entire chapter of the Big Book of AA, there is more written really about examples and ideas and suppositions and problems in the discussion of 8 and 9 than any other step. I think they knew that this was really going to be a problem and really difficult. A story I love to tell, and I'll just repeat it here instead of tonight. It's the best reading of Step 8 I've ever heard. I heard it, I was 2 weeks sober at my first home group by a guy who I had never seen before, and I've never seen him since. He had a heavy New York accent. His name was Nino. I haven't seen the guy in over 22 years, well, 21 and some years. And he was there with a hospital group. He had never read Chapter 5 before. He was reading it for the first time. He had hospital plastic on his wrist. And by the way, the OA thing and all that, what does that have to do with sobriety? Absolutely nothing unless you're going through it. You know, I've sponsored guys who have had to go to Sex and Love Anonymous because they couldn't stop getting arrested. And they went to Sex and Love Anonymous and have never gotten arrested again. And I've heard people from podiums of AA talk about these things pejoratively. What a crazy idea. I mean, first of all, it's an outside interest. You know, second of all, why would I suppose that I could tell a man how to encounter and engage with a power greater than themselves that can solve a problem that's got them in a deathlock? Again, my experience with these guys, and my experience is that I've never done anything instead of AA. I've done it because of AA. If I had one book that I could give to my sons, I love my sons, and I really want them to have a great life. Although I can't cheat them out of 1 minute of their misery. And they don't live miserable lives. They have very successful, interesting lives. But if I could only give them one book, it would be the book that would be the gateway to all the other books. It would be a doorway to the world. And I believe that that is what the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is. If it's a dead end, I'm screwed. It's got a shelf life. As a conduit to the face and the breath of God, it's limitless. And if we read it with an open mind and an open heart, it's pretty clear. It keeps inviting us out. It keeps saying, go talk to people. Talk to these well-meaning people. There's a lot that can be learned. These areas that we used to condemn, that we used to have such a jaundiced view of, take a look at what's going on there. Sometimes a guy will say to me, that's why I drank, or that's why I drank. And I always kind of think, well, if you found out why you drank, if you're sure that this is it, then maybe, then you can, if you can find out why you drink, then we can find out how to get sober. And, if you can find that way, then I smell money. We got a little recovery empire we can start here, It's a mystery. At the end of the day, it's a mystery to me. Okay, I fell down a little rabbit hole. 8 and 9. What? Nino. Thanks. So he's reading chapter 5 for the first time in front of this group. I don't get lost a lot, but when I do, I'm in the back seat of the car. I'm telling you that. And everything seems very far away. Boy, they changed the whole design of this automobile. And he's reading it, and he gets up to step 8. He's got a heavy New York accent, and he read, made a list of all those we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Jesus Christ. And he looked out into the room as if to say, have you seen this? Do you know what's in here? It was gorgeous. It was the purest reading of the step I have ever heard, because it's the only thing I saw. I didn't see anything else. I just thought, oh man, not that money, not those people. I would not have taken that much money if I knew I had to give it back. No way. You think I'm a moron? A guy had lent me a car and I had sold the car. Because I'm a genius. I'm above average intelligence. Me and Nitro, we're above average intelligence. Yikes. The founding of Alcoholics Anonymous dates from Dr. Bob working the 9th step. Got sober for a few months with Bill. He went to a doctor's function that he used to go to in Atlantic City, went on a roaring bender, and then did the rounds in his area. But before he did the rounds, we meet the real hero of Alcoholics Anonymous, the man who gave more than anybody for the founding of AA. Bob had to do this proctological surgery, and Bill fed him a couple of ounces of booze to bring him down from the jitters, and then sent him in to do the surgery. He gave him a bottle of beer and a goofball. The guy he operated on that morning gave more for Alcoholics Anonymous than anybody in the history of the fellowship, as far as I'm concerned. He is our unsung hero. I think we should have a statue to him. I don't think he knew. A bottle of beer and a goofball. And a scalpel. Go with God, Bob. I don't even know if the statute of limitations was up on that when they published the book. But at any rate, my ninth-step experiences were pretty remarkable. I didn't know what to do about my kids or my wife. I had been loaded on heroin the night my father died, and it was just one of the great nightmares of my life. I just didn't know what I was going to do about it. It was horrifying to me. And it just was my black hole. It was something I wasn't going to get over. I couldn't imagine how this was going to go away. My father was lost to me. I mean, anytime anybody talked about him or I saw a picture of him, I felt like I got hit in the side of the head. I couldn't even go in and give him a kiss and touch his cheek and watch him take his light into another room, because the ice around my heart had already gotten so thick, my father was going to rot, and that was it. That was the deal. I had so rearranged my life to accommodate alcoholism by that time, and there was no connectivity in my life at all. And when I came in, I hadn't told anybody I was loaded on dope that night, although people might have known, but I didn't talk about it. And it was all over my inventory. And my father was gone, and people said write a letter or visit the grave, and I tried all that, and I didn't get a bit of relief. And I don't indict those methods. I believe in them. I know them because many men I'm close to use them, and I've used them to great effect, and women. But I didn't get any relief, which scared the crap out of me because I thought there was no way out for me. I was in my first couple of years of sobriety, and I needed some relief from this agony I was in. And I was sober about a year, and I was online to buy lunch. I was on my way to work, and there was this guy in front of me, and he was buying a can of Colt 45 with, change and lint and a half-eaten milk dud or whatever else he had in his pocket. He had been there like all day trying to get this can of malt liquor. It was just a pain in the ass, And he looked at me. I was a couple of months sober, and he turned to me and he said, "What are you looking at?" And usually I would have said nothing. But I said, "How you doing?" And he said, "You don't know how I'm doing. The only people who know how I'm doing are the people in Alcoholics Anonymous." So I went out and I talked to him, and some guys told us to take him to County General Hospital. I didn't know much about 12-step work. I didn't know about what the resources were in our community at all. And a guy told us to take him down to County General and dump him off at the door. Don't show them that he has any resources. Just dump him off the door. I got a guy with a little more time than me, And but for some reason, we didn't dump him off the door. We went through the whole process. We walked the guy through the whole deal down at County. And about midway through, he said to us, "I feel like I'm dying." And the guy I'm with said to him, "That's because you are." And I said, "Oh, no, how could you say that to him?" And I pulled the guy aside, and I'm afraid the guy's not going to like us, And I said, "How can you say that to him?" And Now, the guy has been told a lie that he's got blood in his urine to break his way into a county facility. What are we supposed to say to him? You're just having a bad day. It's all right. This isn't a bad day. I'll let you know when you're having a bad day. This isn't having a bad day. This is what it feels like to die, And I know you've seen this, and I know some of you experienced it. You see people at Alcoholics Anonymous who come in with a bottom, and you look at them and you go, well, they're done. They're never going to drink again, not with what's happened, not with the disarrangement of their family and the destruction of their life. And after a while, if they don't find a way to blow on the embers of this thing and keep it above the horizon and keep this thing invigorated, alive as a spiritual organ, they will drink again. It'll become a bad day. It won't become their bottom. It'll sink below the horizon. It'll stop presenting itself as a real piece of business. And it is incredible to watch the mechanism. All of a sudden, it becomes okay to badmouth people. It becomes okay to live and stay in fear. It becomes okay to be taking advantage of people in relationships. It becomes little things. It gets nicked. With me, it starts with littering. To this day, if I try to drop something, I try to walk away, and the voice says, "In all your affairs." And I go back and I pick it up. I don't know how lame that is, but that's what life is for Mr. Excitement. For me, the drink starts with littering. It just does. That's how it functions with me, And I've traveled back long ways to pick things up. I mean, it's kind of silly. We walked through the whole process with the guy. A couple of years later, I was sponsoring a guy, and he had it. He just was done. He just told me to take a hike. He said, "Look, blow up, man. I've had it with you and this crap and your book crap and your step crap. And if you can fit it into your busy schedule, die, and leave me alone." And and he ripped the guy off on the program. He stole stuff from the guy's apartment. He stole a car. He did all this stuff. And he was making me look pretty bad. And I wanted to sit down and explain a few things to him. Dr. Bob, in his wonderful story, he says that, he wanted when a guy asks me when he's going to want to stop drinking, I take him to two places. I take him to step 10, where it says that the alcohol problem will be removed, you won't even be fighting it. And then I take him to the last page of Dr. Bob's Nightmare, where he says that for the first 2.5 years, he wanted to drink almost every day. Wow. And then he says this gorgeous thing. He says, "But I had so frightfully abused my right to drink, I had lost it." And I love that. I've so frightfully abused my right to tell people where they stand in the universe, I've lost it. I've so frightfully abused my right to do a lot of things that I've lost that right. And how nice to be divested of that heavy weight, And I wanted to talk to this guy, and my sponsor said, "Well, I don't think you have the right to do that. I'm resentful at PJ for ripping people off in AA and making me look bad. It affects my self-esteem, pocketbook, ambition, personal relations, and sex," and I write that 10-step. What are the defects of character? Spiritual pride. How dare this guy come into contact with someone of my spiritual caliber and act thusly. It's hard to believe that he would do such a thing. Probably grandiose winds up there. Now, I'm a guy who borrowed a car and sold it. Maybe hypocrite is on there, and I'm impatient. This guy's not getting well on my schedule, And I wrote about it and moved on and worked with the next guy. And a year or so after that, this guy, PJ, found out that he had a fatal illness, and he called me because I was, I guess, maybe the only guy who hadn't told him what he had thought of him. And he had called a county agency, and they said, "All we can do is take you down to County General and dump you off at the door." And I knew that wasn't so, because I had done my job in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I got to be there for PJ when he died, when I couldn't be there for my pop, and my pop came back into my life. I didn't know that was going to be my 9-step road with my father. I didn't do any of that stuff with PJ so I'd get my father back. Years later, when my sons were in a band, they were 19 and 17, and their adorable best friend died. Suddenly and unexpectedly, a 19-year-old kid had a congenital heart problem nobody even knew he had. He was this adorable boy, and he died in his sleep. And my sons had lost their friend, suddenly and unexpectedly. It's such a deep trauma. And I sat in a Jewish chapel, which I was never going to walk into again, and I held my sons while these big boys had their heads on my shoulder. And Micah said to me, "Dad, what can I do?" And I said, "Son, I do 3 things. I make sure I have nothing blocking me, that I have no resentment against my dear friend. I find a way to continue to have the relationship, and I make sure I'm not being opportunistic about it." And we hugged and kissed, and we felt the presence of his friend, like I felt the presence of my father that day. And I realized that my sons had no relationship with my pop because I was too ashamed to have a picture of him in the house. It just was too hard for me. I couldn't look him in the eye. And So I realized that once I was relieved of that agony, and I started having pictures of them in the house and telling the boys stories about their great grandfather, who was just a great, sweet guy with a big heart. Did a shitty job of being my dad, but he was a great guy, and I missed him terribly. And who knew? You know, who knew? We don't know what we're doing half the time that we're doing it. We just put it in there. We throw a pebble in the pond, you know. I had a friend named Howard Cooper, who you guys would have just loved. He was Bob, my friend Bobby, who I told you about before. Howard came off Skid Row too. He died 22 years sober. He really helped Bobby because Bobby came off Skid Row too. And Howard, in his first year of sobriety, was asked to go with a friend of his down to this flea bag hotel down in Skid Row and 12-step, a guy named Sullivan. And him and his buddy went down there and they talked to this guy Sullivan and on either side of the bed. And Sullivan subsequently drank himself to death and died. 10 years later, when Howard was about 11 years sober, he was at a meeting and a guy came up to him and said, "I just want to thank you. You saved my life." And Howard said, "You're welcome, but I don't know you." And the guy said, "You remember this guy Sullivan?" And Howard said, "Yeah." And the guy said, "I was hiding under the bed the night you 12-stepped him, and I heard everything you said, and I never had another drink again." And we don't know what we're doing half the time we're doing it. You know. Howard was driving out to Vegas one time. This is right before he passed on. And get out there at night. This is a straight shot from L.A. to Vegas if you're out in the desert at night. And he's driving through the desert. Cop pulls him over. He goes, "Oh, crap." This cop walks up to the car and says to Howard, "Are you a friend of Bill's?" And Howard said, "Yeah, what?" And the cop said, "Well, I saw your bumper sticker." He said, "I'm in the fellowship, and I like to start my shift with a little fellowship, so I just want to..." He was an old English guy. We had a couple of English guys in our group, in the North Hollywood group at that time. One of his name was English Bill. He said, "I'm the town drunk of London." He was a sweetheart. And I will tell this story for him, because it was his favorite story. He told it almost every time he shared. Yikes. He used to tell this story about an old-timer got a 12-step call, and he grabs this new guy who's got a couple of months, and they get in a car, and they drive out to the country, off the asphalt, onto a dirt road, off into the boonies. They reach a lean-to, and the door is just like a burlap sack, you know. And they walk in, and there's this drunk in filthy underwear sitting on a stained mattress, sucking on a bottle of wine, and there's a candle flickering in a can. And the new guy looks at the guy and says, "Look, I've only been here a couple of months. I don't know much about this deal, but I know one thing for sure. If you don't stop drinking, you're going to lose all of this." You know? I want to talk about my 9th step with my children for a bit before we break. The idea of making amends to my sons and sitting down and apologizing to them was unbearable to me. They were 6 and 3. What a terrible thing I believe that would have been to do to them. Another confusing, over-emotional, self-indulgent, awful thing. Just, for me, it would have been putting it back on them. I think children should be taught everything that they can understand, and they shouldn't be given a lot of information they can't take in a reasonable way. That's a hard thing to figure out sometimes, but it's a real great way to go. 3-year-olds shouldn't see Spider-Man, in my opinion. It's too scary. It's too hard. 5-year-olds shouldn't see the X-Men, just in my opinion. It's too big a scary world. This is not a criticism. It really isn't. I mean, I didn't grow up knowing this stuff. You know, I have found out about it, you know, at any rate. So it was like with my dad. I wish that those other things had worked for me. I didn't know how I was going to get relieved of this stuff, and I was resentful of myself for being a bad dad and not showing up for my kid's birthday and all of this stuff. And my sponsor said, look, Scott, I don't know what you're going to do. My sponsor wouldn't play God with me. He wouldn't give me this list of tasks to do that would relieve me. He said, I don't know. I don't know how you're going to do this. So let's do your job in AA. Do your job in Alcoholics Anonymous. Take your inventory as your spiritual task, and now let's go do your job. If you study AA history at all, it'll bring you back to a group called the Washingtonians. The Washingtonians was an organization that existed in the United States in the 1800s, and they were gigantic. They were started as a group that was interested in achieving and maintaining sobriety. And then they became a group that got, with no traditions, wound up involved in money, property, and prestige. They became it would be if our grapevine was used to represent either a Democratic or Republican platform. Their organ, their publication, became a political organ. Abraham Lincoln actually talked at we have one letter from Eisenhower that we save. It's just saying, Good going, guys. We're really pleased about you. And we've got other letters too, but we have no opinion. No opinion. At any rate, all right. Help me out. Where's it? Thank you. To duplicate, we have 3 million plus members of AA worldwide. To duplicate the size of the Washingtonians in ratio, we would need 10 million members of AA just in the United States. That's how gigantic these guys were. No one knows about them. All they exist about now, pretty much, is a cautionary tale for members of Alcoholics Anonymous. All right? And after the Washingtonians, in the 1900s, there was a group called the Oxford Group. And the Oxford Group was a first-century Christian group that welcomed members of all sects of Christianity. They were a really interesting group, and they had some things that were really wonderful, and a lot of work that they did was wonderful. They had something that they referred to as the 4 absolutes: absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. The opposite of which is progress is not progress, not perfection. And they a wonderful group that Bill Wilson was 12-stepped by a member of that group. He joined that group. One thing I love is that he actually shared at that group completely stinking drunk, which I just get a huge kick out of. They couldn't keep him off the podium that night. And the Oxford group still exists. There's a couple of members in it in Holland. They're scattered. They exist pretty much as a cautionary tale. Again, because they had no traditions. But this, the history talks about a 6-step program that we had, which was not a codified 6-step program. It wasn't a 6-step program that was on the wall. It was just 6 basic steps based on powerlessness, confession, and restitution. That was basically the structure of it. And then when Bill sat down, when we were moving away from the Oxford group, and he started raising funds, trying to raise funds for Alcoholics Anonymous, which I think is just hysterical. And I mean, basically, they went out and said, we need money. And they went, why? Well, for AA. Well, what do you need the money for? Do you need a special place to do this in? No, we can pretty much do it anywhere. Do you need like a special hat or slacks or something like that? No, you can wear anything. Well, what do you need the money for? I don't know. But can we have the money? And the answer is we don't need the money. We need money now to have GSO and to have Lavinia and the Grapevine and to have literature and to put on every 5 years we have a wonderful celebration or our international. We have that stuff. And built into that system is something they refer to as institutional poverty. We have institutional poverty built into our system. They have, I don't know if it's a 6-month or an 8-month or a 1-year prudent reserve at GSO. I forget which the number is. But that's what we have. And when we go over that number, we reduce the price of our literature to divest ourselves of that extra funds. It's incredible. And they do it in such a lovely way. They do it slowly so that central offices all over the country don't get stuck with this more expensive literature. They give the GSOs, the local places, a chance to divest themselves of that literature at that price, and it gets replaced with the other stuff. It's this perfect machine. You know, the two biggest landowners in New York City, where, as you can imagine, land goes for quite a bit, are the City of New York and the Catholic Church. And eventually, the Catholic Church excommunicated the Oxford group. And Bill had to really make a move there, you know, because if you couldn't be Catholic and a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, they could have held the meetings in a phone booth. So the Catholic Church got into it with the Oxford group. They said you can't be Catholic and be a member of the Oxford group. So when they were writing these the writing of the big book started really as a fundraising thing. They're writing chapters and trying to raise money, and they always get the same thing. What do you need the money for? And they couldn't really come up with anything, you know. And Bill finally, one of the things I love is when he sat down and wrote chapter 5. They had written the first chapters, and then he had to do it. He had to write how it works. And as you can imagine, it was a pretty daunting thing for him. And I love the thing they describe and pass it on. They say, Bill Wilson would have rather sat than stood and rather laid down than sat. That's the story of my life. I've been in a prone position most of my life. I love that. And he laid down in bed, and it just rolled out. And then in AA Comes of Age, they describe this, and I love it. He finishes the 12 steps. The thing that we know is going to be named one of the biggest spiritual, transformative cultural events of the 20th century. He finishes writing it. And in comes two newcomers who rip it apart. He's got a guy with 90 days going, oh, I don't know. I don't like that. I'd change that. It's just perfect Alcoholics Anonymous. It's like Moses coming down, and you know, some guys at a bar ripping apart the 10 Commandments. You know, it's. By the way, this is one thing I just love. Our emblem, our three-sided coin, our triangle. A couple of years ago, if you don't know, we gave it away. We had some lawsuits against companies that were making chips and all this stuff. There was a lot of revenue being created by the use of the emblem. And GSO said, you know, we're stopping fighting everything or anyone. We're not going to get involved with these lawsuits. We give it away. It's done. It's not ours anymore. Which to me is like the church saying, you know, we're done with the crucifix. I just, you know, Madonna's using it, you know, Slayer and Danzig are using it, you know, and we're done. Take the crucifix. It's almost the same thing in a sense. It's just the makeup of Alcoholics Anonymous. So these steps, these bridges to this power, to me, it's so interesting to me. Alcoholics Anonymous was really formed by the confluence of William James, Carl Jung, the Oxford group, and the Sermon on the Mount. Bill and his friends used to, Emmett Fox had a church in Lower Manhattan, and he was a big deal in his day and actually gave talks at Carnegie Hall, and they went to see him there. He was a real iconoclast. He begins his book to the Sermon on the Mount in a way that's really incredible. He says, look, I don't know what you think of Jesus Christ. You might think Jesus Christ was the Son of God. You might think that he was God. You might think that he was an extremist who came to a bad end. He just goes to, and this is a guy, I don't know if you could have a deeper faith than Emmett Fox. And then he says, and he opens the door and the air rushes in. He says, I don't care what you say, but you must admit one thing. He's had a profound effect on the world. A profound effect on billions of people. So come sit with us. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about the idea, the big idea. Not the dogma, not the, you know, in our religion, you put oats on your head. And if you say, I don't like oats on my head, you're out. But if you're okay with the oats, we let you go through, you know. My favorite is the Buddhists. I mean, Buddha was about groundlessness, about no entrenched position, about no entrenched power, about, there's a wonderful story about a talk that Buddha gave at a place called Vulture Mountain. And all of his followers were brought there. And what the message to his followers were, stop taking my words and codifying them. Stop believing in me. Don't let my words and my teachings be a doorstop. Let them be the gateway. And it says when this Buddhist nun who I love, named Pema Chodron, who is a great teacher, says, She has two wonderful pieces, one called The Places That Scare You and one called When Things Fall Apart. And she says that in the Buddhist story, it says when he said this, people actually had heart attacks and died. And she says, I think probably they just went home. But I love that. I love that. And I love, because to me, it's the spirit of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's, come on, let's go. Let's go. Let's hit the floor running. Let's go. Let's hit the panel. Let's go what we're going to learn. What are we going to learn? What's going to happen? So that confluence, that magic alchemy that took place when William James, Varieties of Religious Experience, which has fed and fueled the open spiritual democracy of Alcoholics Anonymous, Carl Jung and his advice to Roland Hazard, which was, that the only thing that is going to help you is getting on board with this collective unconscious, with being part of the real deal, of having a spiritual experience. And I love that, Roland Hazard said, well, I'm good. I'm a deacon in the church. And then Jung said that thing to him, that horrible, wonderful thing. I wish that was going to be enough. I wish that affiliation was going to be enough. But actually, your roots are going to have to grasp a new soil. You're going to have to go through I'm talking about a transformation that is really not related to that. The Oxford Group, which was a wonderful, wonderful organization, again, unfortunately without traditions, and the Sermon on the Mount, Emmett Fox's teachings, and again, the open Christian society that he encouraged and he was part of. I love the big book of AA, but at the end of the day, it's not going to keep me sober. I used to sponsor a guy, and I'm going to end with this story, and then we're going to take our 5 minutes. It's a guy named Jay. He's a great guy, and he was worth millions and millions of dollars, and he was a captain of his industry. He was one of the guys that ran the business, the international business he was in. And he started drinking kind of late in life, late 20s, and started dying right away. His company tricked him into going to a recovery home in Oregon, and he called his brother, who was a member of AA, and said, look, I heard a tape of a guy named Scott Redmond, and this guy could do it. He could really. I don't know how I'm going to get in touch with this guy, how I'm going to reach him, but if I can come into contact with this guy, I'll be cured. And his brother said, "You're a moron. Scott Redmond's my sponsor. You've eaten dinner with him. You stood next to him at my wedding, and you have the mind of a chicklet. And you're an idiot." So it wasn't a big problem for the guy to come into contact with me. And you know how long I kept him sober? Exactly no minutes. And he was always coming up with it. I got it. Some of his extremely wealthy friends sequestered him on a privately owned island in the Caribbean, and he stayed sober until the minute he got off the island, And he used to call me and say, I got it. And one time he calls me, he says, I got it. Come on over. I come over. And at that time, there's about 100 of the original big books left. The big red one with the original cover. There's about, somewhere between 100 and 500. There's a number. And they're very pricey items. And he had one. He had bought it for like $7,000. This is a while ago when $7,000 was $7,000. And I said, I got it. And I opened it up. I said, it doesn't even look like it's ever been read. He says, yeah. I said, so you got the loser book. You got the loser book that's been handed down from loser to loser for 65 years. Congratulations. And eventually, the noise got so bad in his head that he tied his neck to a pipe in the side of a wall and sat down till he was dead. A spiritual experience. And did Jay have a spiritual experience? I saw him have a couple of spiritual experiences. But it's not enough. If I don't have a spiritual experience that takes place in a spiritual community, then I allow them to be the shepherd and the encouraging agent to blow on the embers of that spiritual experience, it won't work. It won't live. It has to be reignited. And that he never did. That he never did. And he was a sweet, sweet man. At any rate, thank you so much. You guys are so great. Thanks so much for giving me so much, and thanks for your attention. Let's take 5, and we'll start driving this home. Hi, everybody. Would those who care to please join me in the Serenity Prayer? God, grant me serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. We're going to spend our end of the deal here, probably take one more little break before we finish, on 10, 11, and 12. And step 10, continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. I take my 10th step exactly the way I did my 4th step. I write my resentments, defects of character, fears, and sexual misconduct. And I write them down, I read them to another person, I get some input, some additions, and I take action. And there are times when things don't change. It happened to me with my eating disorder. It's happened to me at work. It's happened to me in my marriage. It's happened to me in many situations. This recidivism has been, at times for me, terrible, of continuing to suffer. What's my goal? At the end of the day, my goal is to not drink and to be free. To stop suffering and not to be afraid to die. To stop suffering, to not be afraid to die. Wow, what an extraordinary thing. My suffering tends to continue to be things that are not real pieces of business, but are complaints. And they remain complaints. And I think somehow I can continue doing them. It's that insane idea that I can continue doing things that every indication, every piece of my existence and my experience tells me that I cannot do successfully. I don't drink. That's a real piece of business all the time. I've had a spiritual experience and I don't drink. But I have continued to do that stuff. I had problems with money. I made a lot of money and it didn't solve anything. I fell deeply into debt. I was $80,000 in debt in sobriety. I'm resentful at God for being in debt. It affects my self-esteem, pocketbook, ambition, personal relations, and sex. What are the defects? I'm stubborn. I won't stop. I'm asleep. I'm in self-delusion. I'm in self-delusion. I'm stubborn. I'm grandiose. I have shame and guilt. I'm greedy and I'm impatient. And I would write it and read it, and I just got deeper into debt. And I tried to solve it with money, and I made a ton of money, and I fell deeper into debt. And then finally, 4 years ago, I started to write the resentment one more time, and I was so sick from it, I couldn't. My back was broken, and I surrendered. I had that surrender. There's a wonderful book by Harry Tiebout. I know you can get it off the Hazleton thing. I'm not promoting Hazleton, but it's the only place I've known where you can get this book. And it's a collection of his papers on alcoholism. Tiebout, of course, is in a lot of our AA literature. He's one of the great first friends of AA. He was the therapist that brought Marty Mann and some of the first pioneering members of Alcoholics Anonymous to AA. He writes some papers about the first 3 steps that to me are the greatest things I've read about the first 3 steps. He writes about the horrifying self-medicating and self-mending properties of the alcoholic mind. And it's really quite something. His take on the first 3 steps, which in the Big Book of AA, there's no written instructions on how to take the first 2 steps in the Big Book of AA. I mean, you could take a look and say, steps, the second and third chapters are about step 1 and 2. Well, that's true, but there are no written instructions on how to take the first 2 steps. There's written instructions on every other step, which makes good sense to me, and I'll tell you why. I think that the framers knew that if you didn't think that you were an alcoholic, that I could piss into a gale force wind, and there was nothing it was not on me. I've started to work the steps with a guy, and I've said, "Are you an alcoholic?" And the guy said, "No." And I went, "Well, you want to go to the movies? Because I'm not going to sit here, number one, and convince you. And if you're not an alcoholic, I don't know what the hell we're doing. Let's play Yahtzee. I don't know what the hell to tell you, But I think that these guys pretty much knew that these were intuitive. And if you didn't have some suspicion that there was something wrong, there was really nothing they were going to do to convince you of that. Otherwise, it seems to me that there would be sort of a line you had to cross or a specific action you had to take. But they're just in the three pertinent ideas. That's the only place that they're landed. If you can answer yes to these questions, you can move. You can go, okay, fine. That being said, we're being convinced we're at step 3. Convinced. Who the hell knows what that means? I mean, I was convinced to as much as I was convinced at that time. I'm a lot more convinced now. I had a very mild case of alcoholism at first. Very mild. And it's gotten worse. I mean, it's horrible. It's fatal now. And it was not fatal for a long time. Took a while. Infection enters through the ear. And so at the end of the day, I would like to stop suffering, and I would like to not be afraid to die. That would be a wonderful design for living for me. So in step 10, as I have continued to suffer from these things, I want to explain to you the journey that step 10 has offered me. So I'm resentful at Scott for being in debt. It affects those things, and I mentioned the defects. And then I write it and I read it, and then I borrow some money. I increase my credit card debt. I want my kids to have a certain thing at a certain time, so I finagle it. I do an end run around it. And I create more suffering. And I create more mind reading and create more not living in today. I can't live in the moment when I'm experiencing this stuff. So I continue to repeat it. So what do? It says in step 6 and 7, now I do my 10th step. So I read my inventory and then I do 6 and 7. It's part of my 10th step. It's part of the process. Now what does it say in 6 and 7? It says I go over the first 5 propositions in the book and I ask myself, am I trying to make mortar without sand? Am I ready to move forward? Am I really ready to bring this to God and say, will you relieve me, and be willing to be relieved? 6 and 7, humbly ask him to remove these shortcomings. Humbly isn't take him if you can, big guy. Humbly isn't take him, you rotten son. Humbly is, Pop, please help me. I can't bear this. I can't bear pretending I'm a grown, mature man to show my sons how to live, and living in debt and irresponsibly and having to sort of lie about why I can't pay certain things off. And if you're my friend, you're probably lending me money. It's really ugly. And I'm 80 grand in debt, 10 years, 12 years sober. I'm $8,000 in debt today. And it's because I surrendered. It's because my back was broken, because I went back to the first 5 propositions in the book and said, why are you not changing this? Why is this a complaint? And I want to tell you, a complaint in sobriety is an ugly thing. It's a lot easier for me to stay drunk and complain than be sober and suffer, and feel the full impact of that, miserable feeling about me. Is it step 1? Am I not really? Now, let's just take it. Let's take the first 5 propositions and let's just laser in on this specific problem. This specific thing that keeps, I don't care if it's your weight, if it's cigarettes, if it's any of that. What does that have to do with sobriety? Nothing, unless you're going through it. Does it have anything to do with Alcoholics Anonymous? Of course it does. If I hate myself, resentment's the great destroyer of all alcoholics. It's the great destroyer. It's the source of all spiritual illness. How can this not be pertinent? Do I need to share about it from a podium? No, I don't. I don't want to offend people and piss people off and cloud people up. I don't want a newcomer to sit there and go, I got to stop everything? I'm not interested in that. I really am not. I don't want to piss people off. It's not interesting to me. It's not fun. I'm not here to teach them anything or take care of them. It's a lousy job. Is it step 1? Am I not admitting that I'm powerless over money? And that my life is unmanageable around money? And if I'm not really bringing step 1 to bear with money, what can I do? How can I demonstrate? What demonstration can I make? What can I do to appreciate the fact that I really am unmanageable? Is it the stuff about, do I not even know the price I'm paying for my credit card debt? Do I not even know that? It's so unmanageable that I won't even get the information about what I'm really paying. Okay, a way to demonstrate my unmanageability is to find that out. That would be an action I could take to find that out. I don't want to do that. It's too painful. It's horrible. And I don't want it. I'd rather just pay the bill. Leave me alone. I'm not willing to pay that price anymore. Okay. Is it step 2? Do I not really believe that God can restore me to sanity here? It's like with food, right? God can keep Saturn on its axis, but he can't order lunch for me. What the hell is that all about? God can keep all the electrons moving around, all the atoms in the universe, but I don't think he's going to handle my credit card. I just don't see it. It doesn't match up. So if I'm not applying step 2, if I'm not allowing myself to be restored to sanity in that area, what demonstration can I make? Do I have to expand my prayer life? Do I have to see how God is operating in other people's lives? And not Susie Ormond. I'm very happy for her, okay, or whatever her name is, And maybe that'll lead me to her. Maybe that'll be a good thing. I don't know. But I want to see how God is being implemented by my fellows. And then I don't want to be sarcastic. It's like a funny, cute thing to say. But she might be exactly what I need to do. The books I need to read and the CDs I need to... I don't know. I don't know. Or is it step 3? Have I really not made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God in this situation? Which means that when, sometimes my brain is like, I grew up in New York, when you turn the lights on, the roaches scramble for the door. And sometimes when the light goes on in my brain, the roaches scramble for the door, And it says in step 11, I pause, I take a breath, I ask for some help, I let something else in. So maybe with step 3 to make this decision to turn my will and my life, how can I demonstrate? What action can I take? Or is it step 4? Am I not doing enough inventory? Are there pockets like that little dental thing? Somebody told me they were like the dental thing, but that it's a little pinprick and I open it up and there's this whole other thing I haven't examined. Resentments against being brought up poor, not having any dough, thinking if I throw dough around it'll make me feel like I'm more in the world. Resentments against, I used to have these friends and they were very wealthy and I used to think they made me come to their house once a year to look at their pool, I just, and what they were doing was inviting me over to their house. Those disgusting pigs, terrible people. But when you're about you, it's all just, a big cavalcade of failure, Or is it step 5? Step 5 says something so beautiful. It says that sometimes a newcomer will keep facts about themselves that's later placed them as a bit, and they drank. So what am I withholding here? Is there something that I'm not admitting about this? Is there something about big shotism, about thinking that I have the largesse to move through my life and not be bothered with this stuff like, interest, or these annoying things, that the world seems to be. I'm a spiritual being and I don't need to be bothered by this stuff. So I go back to the first 5 propositions in the book, and I try to apply them to this thing that I continue suffering from. And step 10 has been my route back to the first 5 steps. It has increased my appreciation and my experience of the first 5 steps in a way that nothing else has. Now, Bill says in the 12 and 12 something I agree with and I think is incomplete. He says that that pain is the touchstone of spiritual growth. And I think it's incomplete. I think pain is a touchstone of spiritual growth. For me, there are many other touchstones of spiritual growth. Joy is a touchstone of spiritual growth for me. I like this, and I want more. And I take action based on more, because it's fun. It's like that thing we were talking, that wonderful question about putting your partner first in a relationship. It's fun. It's a delight. It's not a selfless act. Not for me. Not for me. It's not a selfless act. I like this, and I want more. And I take action based on more, because it's fun. It's like that thing we were talking, that wonderful question about putting your partner first in a relationship. It's fun. It's a delight. It's not a selfless act. Not for me. Not for me. It's not a selfless act. People are born asleep. They get married asleep. They have children asleep, and they die asleep. Waking up is a joyful experience and sometimes very uncomfortable. It's not fun to wake up sometimes. There's this great old story about his father wakes up his son. It says, it's time to wake up. His son says, I don't want to wake up. He says, you got to go to school. I don't want to go to school. The kids pick on me. I don't want to. And his father says, well, you have to. You're the principal of the school, and you have to wake up and go. And it's... it's time to wake up. So these areas where I have had the repetition of these difficulties, and I've gone back to the first 5 propositions of the book through the 10th step, I've had to wake up in these areas. And that's what happened to me with money. And it's not because I'm a nice guy or a good guy, but I will tell you this. I can honestly tell you that since that surrender 4 years ago, I have not suffered with money. I'm not telling you I haven't had a difficult time. I'm not telling you I haven't had problems. I'm not telling you any of that stuff. I'm not telling you that it hasn't been difficult when I've had to not buy certain things I've wanted to buy and not been the greatest dad in the world because of that. My kids don't give a crap about that. They really don't. I didn't raise kids like that. They don't. They just really... They like stuff. They're not anti-stuff, but it's not emblematic of success or a successful relationship or love with them, So step 10 has been a remarkable expansion and fuel for my experience of the first 5 steps. I mentioned before briefly something that I really is part of my experience. Without 10, there's no 12 for me. I will not remain part of Alcoholics Anonymous if I don't examine my resentments and my fears as applied to Alcoholics Anonymous. I do a lot of speaking, and it's highly overrated. And people sometimes start making an object out of you. They start treating you like a spiritual Pez dispenser, my sponsor again said at the end of the day this should be pleasurable and enjoyable and comforting at the end of the day. And if this podium becomes a barrier between me and AA, I will die. My sponsor, who wrote Dr. Alcoholic Addict, was very close with Chuck Chamberlain, and Paul was 2-3 years sober when he got that written in the book, and he became an AA luminary immediately. I mean, huge reaction to this. Traveling with him was like traveling with a rock star. And people used to come up to him and say, please bless my chips. Bless my chips. I had somebody ask me to bless their chips. And it's very hard to not be sarcastic, and they don't deserve that treatment. They don't. They deserve love and kindness and tolerance. I'm not going to bless your chip, but I love you. I held the chip, but I didn't say it's blessed. At any rate, Chuck pulled Paul aside and said to him, we kill people like you. We kill you. We're going to put you up on a pedestal and where you can't reach anybody. And we really can't reach you. And then we're going to love you, and then we're going to make you pay the price for our love. Because then we're going to get pissed off at you. Because you're not going to act like the object that I've made you. What a great thing to look at a sponsor and have a teacher and not make an object of them. To not make an object of the sponsee who's doing the right thing. They're doing the right thing. Then when the sponsee doesn't do the right thing, whatever the hell the right thing is, then they're outside the box. They're no longer acting like the object that I've made them. I do that in my relationships. I can do that in a marriage. I can do that with my teachers. One of the things Pema Chodron talks about in a gorgeous way is the beauty of taking on and leaving a teacher. I had to, after I left my sponsor of 10 years in my home group, one of the things that happened was something that had been happening to me my whole life. I had a terrible separation from him. This is the guy who was my best friend I ever had. When they asked me to have an emergency number at work or something, I gave him his name and his number. It's the first thing that came to my mind. And he carried the Torah at both of my kids' bar mitzvahs. It's a big deal. And I had one of the worst separations I've ever had with anybody. So here I'm left with this thing I've felt many times in my life. Because of the nature of the horrible separation, now I'm thinking, oh, so you aren't great. I didn't really have a good relationship with you. We didn't really have a good time. And I'm making this colossal mistake. I'm letting the horrible separation, which is a separate activity, color the fantastic relationship. I'm taking it, I'm gathering evidence and mind reading again. I am so bad at this. And the evidence gathering process is so absurd. But I'm applying that and using it to sort of be vengeful about the whole thing. And what it drove me to, because in this case, I couldn't accept it. The evidence of the wonderful relationship there was too much there. There was 10 years of action, of carrying the message, starting groups, starting meetings, having grand sponsees, having potlucks, doing all this stuff. It was impossible to vilify all of that experience based on the horrible thing. And I said, you've got to take a look at the quality of separation in your life. You seem to have very successful relationships, and you have some terrible ones too, but you certainly have some and this has been extremely successful. So I had to look at the fact that what my idea of a separation was, kill everyone in the village. Kill them, poison the water, and slaughter the livestock. Bye. I'm ready to go. The village looks like an ashtray. I can leave now. Everything is annihilated. And that's the way that's my idea of separation. I have a much different idea now. I look for I've just separated with one of my dearest friends, one of the guys I had one of the deepest fellowships with in AA. And I have had a separation, and for me it's been so sad. It's been so heartbreaking. And it's a good separation. It's a good separation. By the way, part of the definition of a good separation is not that everyone's happy. That can't be part of it, because then it's people-pleasing. So is everybody happy here? No. I'm not happy. I don't think he's happy. It's a good separation. I told him the truth, and I told him how much I loved him, and I told him that certain things just weren't going to be okay for me. And he wasn't able to express to me what's going on. And so now, and this is very much pertinent to that wonderful thing I read about forgiveness, when Fox says, when it appears in your mind again, touch it like a feather on a bubble, bless it, and say, oh, I'm forgetting that I forgave you. I need to remember that I forgave you. I'm forgetting. So now when stuff comes up with this guy, and it's painful, the fact that I'm not going to see him, that we're not going to do, we used to do retreats together and all this stuff, that's gone. Who knows, might be back, but it's gone, And what I do is I say, and it was great. And then I deliberately, and I want to talk about deliberate action in this session. I deliberately think about some of the wonderful experience we've had. What I mean by deliberate action is, I don't know if anybody here ever lies on the couch and spends the time on the couch, let's say 90% of it, cursing yourself for sitting on the couch. Sounds like fun. Great way to start an afternoon. I'm going to stay on the couch. I'm a worthless lump of protoplasm. I'm a piece of crap. I should be doing X, Y, and Z. I hope the following list of people do not catch me on the couch. Relax. What one of my teachers has suggested is to act deliberately. And what I mean by that is, I'm going to sit on the couch. I'm going to the couch. I'm not going to try to talk myself out of going on the couch. What I want to do is, instead of squandering my time on the couch, I would like to deliberately sit on the couch instead of being sucked into the black hole of the couch and tied by my sloth and agony and low self-esteem to the couch. I want to deliberately declare I am sitting on the couch. I am going to enjoy doing nothing. I might watch stupid television, but I'm going to be on the couch, and I'm going to give myself a certain amount of time to do it. When I act deliberately, it is an incredible gift. My mother is a very, very troubled woman. very troubled woman. I had to have back surgery. I had a really invasive back surgery 2.5 years ago. They put screws and cable in my back. They drilled 4.5 inches down into my vertebrae at 6 different locations. The insult to my body was gigantic. It took me a year to even get out of the tall grass. So I call my mother, and I'm telling you, I am not exaggerating. This was the conversation. Hi, Mom, I need back surgery. Really, darling, isn't that the surgery that leaves you paralyzed? And I said, actually, there's a gray area now in between the paralysis and not getting the operation. There's this whole other spectrum of experience. And I was telling people at lunch, my mother lives in a world, the best metaphor I can come up with it is anyone ahead of her on the freeway is a moron, and anyone who passes her is a maniac. And a hand went up in the back. And so she lives in a world populated by morons and maniacs. That's where she lives. So when I talk to my mother, I talk to her deliberately. And this is what I mean. What I used to do was talk on her and wait for the first mistake. And wait for the evidence to pour in. That she's just still acting like her. She just acts like her. She has never not acted like her. And now I'm going to call her and let's just see when she starts. Usually starts after hello. So, if I make a judgment, I'm going to say, I'm calling my mother, who's a disgusting woman who should not be allowed to talk to other human beings. She is the dark side of the force. She just, lives in a world. She's a shit magnet. Anything, if there's any shit in the universe, it just finds her and attaches itself to her. And if it doesn't, she'll go running after it and grab on it. So what I do now, and I have very successful conversations with my mother, is I call my mother and I say, oh, Mom, I love you so much. I am willing to accept the fact that you are spiritually sick. I know how difficult life is for you. I know how troubled you are. And I know that. And I am going to speak to her deliberately, knowing that I'm going to ask how people are. And what I'm going to get is a litany of rashes, ointments, mental disorders, financial problems, and potential accidents. I mean, that's what I'm going to get. That's the list. I'm not going to get. Now, here's the deal. If I'm groundless, if I don't take a fixed position, if I don't ferociously defend my agony, okay. Now, if I ferociously defend my agony, I need my mother to continue being an awful person. I will deliberately talk to my mother, knowing that she's a very troubled person. And I'm open for a surprise. I'm available to be delighted and comforted. That's what you've asked me to do, no? Be available to be delighted and comforted. Because at the end of the day, that's really what I want. I want to stop suffering and I don't want to be afraid to die. So step 10 for me is the engine, I can say, that has been the source of my success as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, my reinvention and reinvigoration of the first 5 steps in the Big Book. And it's so funny, because it's so interesting to me, because 10 and 11, are butted up against each other in the book, and there are these one of the things one of my teachers talks about, which is very interesting to me, many people do visualizations, which are very helpful to them. And she says that a visualization is a tacit denial of where you are right here, right now. Saying that I'll kind of be, I want to be in this different place. It's kind of an interesting thing. And I'm not putting down visualizations. I can't imagine that anything we're doing to encounter God that you could say, don't do that. No, don't do that. It might get you close to God. Don't do that. We all... It's like different applications and ways of working the steps. I can't imagine that there would be anything bad or wrong in there, unless it's, I can't eat sugar myself, but if I can drink your blood if you eat sugar. That's probably not a good idea. But it's kind of interesting to me right now. At any rate, in step 11, it says the occasional hunch or inspiration will slowly have become a working part of the mind. And it talks about some stuff to do when I wake up and when I go to sleep. And then it talks about opening that door, The one book that I'd like to give my children, the Doorway to the World. the book to take you to all the other books. And one time my son Jesse was a little boy. He was about 3, and my wife was holding him, and he was touching her cheeks, and he just looked like he wanted to crawl into her face. And he said to her, "Mom, you are all the words." And imagine if you had a mother who was a vigorous, vital person who spent her time finding ways to reinvent and reinvigorate that vitality. Imagine if you had a mother like that who showed you that thing. And some of you might have, and some of you might not. I believe I can find that in God. I believe that I can find that in the spiritual democracy of Alcoholics Anonymous. I believe I have found it. I don't always do it, but I believe I have found it. Has anyone ever invited you to be a grown, intelligent, connected person who belongs in the world? If no one has ever invited you to be that, I'm inviting you to do that. I'm inviting you to do that right here, right now, to be a grown, vital, vigorous person who has a place in the world. I want to challenge your idea, if it's one of your ideas, that you're willing to believe the worst about yourself. And I believe the only way that happens for me is through connection and through experience of you. You know, I need to know God, and I firmly, my experience tells me that my only way to know God is to know Him through you, to know it through you. The Buddha, that little adorable cutie, the Buddha says that pain or suffering arises through desire or craving. To be free of pain, we have to cut the bonds of desire. All cravings are the mind seeking salvation or fulfillment in external things and in the future as a substitute for the joy of being. As long as I am my mind, I am those cravings, those needs, wants, attachments, and aversions. And how terribly, awfully true for the alcoholic, who sees their success and succor and failure and comfort in a spirit, in the spirits that they're drinking and the drugs that they're taking, who make a life, make an attachment and make an identity of these resentments, this self-loathing, or this grandiosity, these fears and this sexual misconduct. Where the spirit, I become so attached to this spiritual illness, and the way that I have arranged my life to accommodate this spiritual sickness, it is my attachment, it is my craving, it is what I'm living. And in AA, this incredible war of attrition, what is the process of sobriety to me if it's not to rearrange my life to accommodate sobriety? I mean, I know that I rearranged my life to accommodate alcoholism. I know that's what I did. I did it for years. I did things I swore I'd never do. And then I did more things I swore I'd never do. And then I did things that were not even within the realm of possibility that I would ever do. Right before I got sober, I reached for something across my dinner table, and my arm came near my older son, and he went like this. And he did it like that. There was no guile to it. He was a 6-year-old boy who was so repelled by my presence that when my arm came near him, he recoiled as if from a hot flame. And I said, how did this happen? How did this happen? I love him. I love him more than I've loved anything. How could such a thing happen? It happened in the middle of the night, in between sentences, when I wasn't looking. It happened as I had to survive, as I had to rearrange it. A couple of months ago, my son Jesse emailed me, and the email from this 25-year-old man was, quote, I was just overwhelmed with how much I love you because I've rearranged my life to accommodate sobriety. And that doesn't mean that my kid's going to love me. That's just what's happening at my house. That's just what's happening at my house. It's not because I'm doing this better or more goodish than the people whose kids are ill or the people whose kids have been annihilated. That's just what's happening at my house. You know, when I had to pay emergency room stuff for my kids during their adventures, that's just what was happening at my house. I want to talk about 10 and 11 in connection with my kids for a minute, and then we're going to take our last break and we'll drive this sucker home. I came home from talking at an AA meeting. I believe I had stamped out alcoholism that particular night. I really... I saved a lot of people that night. I just blessed a lot of chips. And, oh my God. And, and I said, I came home, I said to Nancy, how you doing? She said, I'm fine. Your son's kind of having a tough time. He's on a bad acid trip. He was 13. I said, what? He was on a bad acid trip. I didn't know he had smoked a cigarette. So I went in and I said a prayer. I came back out. I went into my son. I looked at him in the eye and I said, sweetheart, it's a pill and it's going to wear off and I'm not going to leave you until it does. He said, oh God, Dad, thanks. And then I called a therapist who's a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the therapist prescribed some medication. Another member of AA picked it up and brought it over to the house. And I said, thanks, Bob. Good night. And Bob said, I'm not going to sleep till Micah goes to sleep. He stayed up and he talked to the boy. And I was a guy who couldn't show up for my dad the night he was dying. I was all alone. And now I don't know if my kid's going to make it or not, but I know the demonstration I've been part of already, just in that moment, you know. So what I did was I did what you've done with me. I didn't try to crush him. I didn't have a sponsor who ever tried to crush me, never tried to deflate me, never tried to engineer that deflation that without I would die. He was an interested observer, a loving observer, and didn't protect me from it, but didn't try to do it. And I did the same thing with my kid. I said, I'm not going to get ahead of you. What's happening now is you're going to go into therapy now. You're going to go get therapy. I didn't ask him if he wanted it. I said, this is what's happened, and now this is going to happen. He was in a very privileged program in public school that very few kids got into. He started therapy, and a couple of months later, he was busted for selling drugs in school. I said, okay, now here's the deal. You're a teenager, and I understand you're going to experiment, but now you've been busted for drugs. You've been thrown out of this program. You're now going to Starsky and Hutch High. He's at the gangbanger school now because nobody wants him. He's a drug dealer. And I said, I'm not going to get ahead of you. I'm just going to stay with you. But here's the deal. You're working your way to the system. So now you're on zero tolerance. There's no experimentation. You're going to go to outpatient and you're going to have random drug testing. And if you test dirty, you're going to go away. Because that's what's happening. That's the reality of what's happening. So he goes to, and he never tested dirty. And the drug program was a joke. It was like half of these drug programs. They're ridiculous. Not all of them, but a lot of them are just crap. And he's going to this thing, and he's saying, and he's got random drug testing. If he tests dirty, he's done. I'm going to send him to a 30-day program, but I'm not getting ahead of him. I'm just staying with him and mirroring the reality of what's going on. So I pick him up at this thing, and he goes, Dad, this sucks. I said, I completely agree. Because he's told me what they're doing. I said, I think it's a complete crock of crap. And I looked at him, and I said, look where we are. And he said, yeah. Didn't blame me. He knew it wasn't something I had done. It's just where we were. Talk about overcoming a fear of confrontation and just telling the truth and being together. And he succeeded, and he got through it, and he's not allergic. He had an overdose after that, but at the end of the day, he's not allergic. In 2 weeks, I will go to Ithaca, New York, and I will watch him graduate from Cornell University Graduate School for Public Policy. And he engineered that all by himself. I didn't have anything to do with it. It didn't cost me a penny. I didn't have to go into debt because of it, But I easily could have gone into debt, buying him socks, really expensive socks that I was positive he needed, that were run by nuclear reactors, I had written the resentments against him for having this mistake. I wrote the resentments against the school for throwing him out. I wrote the resentments against the people that he was hanging out with that I blamed for his behavior. I wrote the resentments against myself for being a bad father. Fancied or real, it has the power to actually kill. And I thought I had really screwed up. I told this story at lunch. It's one of the beautiful perception things. I was with some Al-Anon friends, and one of them said, my son is missing. And the other Al-Anon friend said, oh, no, he knows where he is. He knows exactly where he is. You just don't know where he is. So he's not missing. He knows where he is, but you just don't know where he is. And that's a better thing to know. That's a better thing to know, rather than he's been enslaved on an island in China, or something like that. He's just wandering around downtown. So at the end of the day, I never got ahead of him. I never got behind him. I just stayed with him and I loved him. And that's what you guys have always done for me. You've stayed with me and you've loved me. And it's been, for me, propelled by 10 and 11. The golden chalice is 12, which we'll be spending. I'm going to spend a little time on 12 and on the traditions to end off our session. And again, I just want to thank you guys so much for the generosity of heart and your attention. You guys are just such a pleasure to be with. So thanks so much. We'll take a little break and we'll finish it off. I'm Scott Redmond. I'm an alcoholic. Would you all join me in the Serenity Prayer? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can. Listen to the difference. What typically happens to me in the last session of one of these things, I get a little frantic trying to make sure I say everything. So I'm going to commit to you that I'm not going to do that. So when it ends, it might really fizzle. I'm just not going to try to come up with a big wow. I'm not going to take my clothes off like I did at the airport. Okay. That's right. That was the introduction. The king of Babylon, conqueror of the world. And he was the conqueror of the world as he knew it. His name was Nebuchadnezzar. Owning everything, fearing everything, understanding nothing, he went mad and died. The king of Babylon, conqueror of the world as he knew it, Nebuchadnezzar. Owning everything, fearing everything, understanding nothing, went mad and died. I don't want to live that way. Bill Wilson could have owned Alcoholics Anonymous. He really could have. One of my favorite stories, humility stories about Bill was, some of you might have seen some years ago, they made I thought it was just a terrific film called My Name is Bill W. I really liked the film. I thought they did a really good job, and it really could have sucked, and I thought it was really well handled and well made. And the writer, interesting guy, became very close, or certainly spent a lot of time with Lois Wilson while he was writing it. And Lois was alive for some time after the release of the film. But in his research, he found out that Bill was offered, that story that is in history, was offered the cover of Time magazine. That's kind of Man of the Year or something like that. And he turned it down. And the writer commented to Lois, wow, what an incredible thing to turn it down. And Lois said, oh, you think it's incredible, do you? And the guy said, yeah. He said, well, let me ask you a question. How many people have been on the cover of Time magazine? And the guy said, well, thousands. She said, yeah. And how many people have turned down the cover? One. And he told the story as often as he possibly could. I really love that a lot. People talk sometimes about Bill's sort of mythical 5-year depression. One of the things that's really interesting about that, which is discussed by Ernest Kurtz in Not God, is that Bill's depression, deep depression, started right after he finished off a press junket for Alcoholics Anonymous, where his name appeared and his face appeared in newspapers. It was about the time that a catcher for the Cleveland Indians and a woman named Marty Mann were out in public breaking their anonymity. We had no traditions at that time, and we didn't understand that that anonymity was actually going to be the spiritual foundation of all these principles. I believe that when someone engages in crosstalk at an AA meeting and uses their privilege to share as a way to directly talk to me, that they're violating my anonymity. I should have the expectation of sharing happy, joyous, and free at a meeting and not be signaled out, addressed, and having a one-sided conversation with me. I believe that's a violation of my anonymity. And it's not a big deal. It's just the source of all the spiritual principles, my anonymity. I believe that when I have a certain familiarity, and I love fellowship, and I also feel that when there's a lot of familiarity in a group, sometimes we exclude the newcomer. I believe that when some people get up to take a 30-day chip and the whole room goes nuts, and then somebody gets to take a 30-day chip and nobody says anything, by not giving the person we're excited about anonymity, we're injuring the person who we're not excited about. Now, again, I don't think we need to be nitpicky about this, but it's an interesting thing for me to look at. this went so far. I have a bad habit of starting groups and then leaving them. And, what's happened is, I was on the phone with my sponsor, my present sponsor, who doesn't really want me to call him my sponsor, but tough crap. And he just, as a rule, doesn't sponsor guys who he doesn't attend meetings with, but I use him as a sponsor. And when I first started working with him a couple of years ago, there was this area in my life that I was getting no movement in at all. And he said to me, okay, this is what I want you to do. I want you to throw yourself to the ground and scream for God's help. I said, what? He said, I don't want you to do it so God will hear it. I want you to do it so that you'll hear yourself screaming. And I started doing it, and it was great. That's what I needed at that time. And then I had this other thing that was hurting me. And he's an old Marine. He's a Marine pilot. And I had this thing that just wasn't moving for me. He said, okay, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go into God's ready room. Okay, it's like going in with the pilots before a mission. You go into God's ready room, and you're going to be sitting there with the rest of the pilots, and then God's going to come in, with his little clipboard, and he's going to say, okay, I need some guys for pain. Who's in for pain? And I want your arm to shoot up and say, I'm in. Count me in. I'm in for pain. So I start doing this meditation that I'm in God's ready room, and I started in my prayers. I started saying, I'm available for pain. Brent, what's that phrase? Do you remember the phrase? I'm volunteering for the pain of change. Thank you. And I started ending my meditation with saying, I volunteer for the pain of change. 2 years later, I'm talking to him. I said, that God's ready room thing. He said, what? I said, the God's ready room thing, the volunteering for the pain of change. And that's what he said. He said, I'm in. I volunteer for the pain of change. That's what he did. He said, I don't know what the hell are you talking about? I said, you don't even remember this. I've made it a religion, right? I franchised it. I've got churches called God's Ready Room. I'm selling leather jackets and clipboards. You don't know what the hell I'm talking about, right? It's just something I hope that works for the guy. Never repeated it, didn't remember it. The only thing he's retaining is water. He doesn't... And I make a religion of this stuff. It's like what the Buddha said. Stop. The Buddha said, be like a goldsmith. Take my words, cut them, melt them, polish them, distill them, rub them, see how good they are, real they are, see how they come out of your mouth, see how they fit into your brain. What a gorgeous thing. A lot of people, and this used to happen with my sponsor, they wanted them to run for head drunk. It's great having a head drunk. Takes the heat off me. The head drunk said it. I went to God's ready room. Didn't work for me anymore. That nutty God's ready room thing. Bill Wilson could have owned Alcoholics Anonymous, and he would have probably, smothered it in the crib, right? And one of my favorite things in any of our writing is if you haven't read AA Comes of Age, it's a pretty dry read, but it's very rewarding. It's not the easiest book in the world for a lot of us to get through, but it's gorgeous. And in it, he talks about this scene where he's seeing the first international. It's 1950. He has the traditions are being ratified, and Alcoholics Anonymous is being taken from the hands, lovingly taken from the hands of the framers, and it's being moved into the Alcoholic Foundation, which became the General Service Office of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he writes, as I spoke again, I felt the tug of that desire to set back the clock, and for a moment I dreaded the coming change as much as anyone. But this mood quickly passed, and I knew that all worrying concerned as a parent was now at an end. The consciousness of Alcoholics Anonymous, as moved by the guidance of God, could be depended upon to ensure AA's future. And here's the beauty part. Clearly, my job henceforward was to let go and let God. Alcoholics Anonymous was at last safe, even from me. To have my children safe, even from me. For him to say that Alcoholics Anonymous is safe, even from me, is one of the great birthing statements I've ever heard. It's extraordinary, And it must have been fun just to continue to be Bill Wilson for a while. That must have been a lot of fun. I believe that I was starved of the traditions when I was new in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was part of an AA culture. I was part of the one of the oldest groups in AA in Los Angeles, and they had not made a contribution to central office either in LA, California, or in New York in 25 years. They were suffering from what I refer to as clubitis. And what I mean by that is they had become a club that were more concerned with the continuation of the bureaucracy of their club than being connected to AA. And I believe that that's unfortunate. First of all, it limits the possibility of your newcomer to find out how you're part of the deal, how you're part of the big laughing love of Alcoholics Anonymous, And it doesn't allow them to see our beautiful corporate pyramid, unlike any corporate pyramid ever. If you look at it, the top rung is rank and file member of AA, and the lowliest member is the Board of Trustees. That's the lowest functioning member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And people don't understand how we work. The sociologists have been studying us for years. They can't figure it out. The original board, which didn't have any alcoholics on it at all, except for Bill, used to say, you've got to make more rules, and Bill would say the thing that we know is true. They don't need rules. They have alcoholism. Believe me, the alcoholism will work just fine. It is enough of an ass scalder to really, really make sure that they have no choice. They have no choice. Isn't that the truth, And because the traditions were not part of the AA culture I was brought up in, and because I didn't take the initiative to go and learn about them, I was starved of them, and I got sick in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't understand anonymity. I thought it was okay to call out and make comments while people were sharing. That's a violation of anonymity, I believe. People should have an expectation of anonymity when they come in here. The group comes before the individual. I thought it was that you should have the right to share anything from the podium of AA. No, I don't think that's true. I'm not going to tell you what you can share or not share, but I am going to engender, encourage, and be involved in AA culture that doesn't welcome that. I have been part of groups where the patients have become part of the running the institution, and it's not fun. It's not fun. It's dangerous, and it's scary for people. And I don't think people should be in danger or scared when they come to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. I think that's a big mistake. And I've included a traditions checklist. If you're not involved in the traditions, and I think that the vast majority of you are, take a look at it. It's just a fascinating, and I give that to you. It's available on the web, but I just want to present it to everybody and give it to you. It's a wonderful document, and it's kind of a checklist on each tradition. And it says stuff, that annoyed the crap out of me when I first saw it, because, it says stuff like, do you sit in the same seat when you go to your meeting with the same people? Yeah, so it's my seat. And what they talk about is closing off and becoming myopic about your participation in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's a fascinating checklist. In the packet also, on the second page, there's 1, 2, 3, 7, and 11. And I just wanted to share with you the way I start my morning. If it's something that'll be helpful to you on a prayer level, it's just something I wanted to offer the group. I'm powerless. My life is unmanageable. I know that you will restore me to sanity. I turn my will and my life over to you. Then I take step 3, then I take step 7, and then I say, I made this list of things that I think are kind of enumerated in step 11. Father, I forgot it. Anytime I try to say it out loud in front of a group, I can never hold on to it. But if I start, I'll be good. Please direct my thinking today. Show me all through the day what my next step is to be. Give me whatever I might need to overcome such difficulties. Please keep my thoughts especially divorced from selfish, dishonest, and self-seeking motives. Please keep me from self-will and self-pity. Hold me close to you. Reveal your work to me and give me the power to carry it out. Hold me close to you and keep me sober just for today so that I might better do thy will. Thy will be done, not mine. And I've got to keep this from becoming a hastily mumbled set of prayers that I start in the morning while I'm doing something else. And the only way for me to do that is to not continue to examine that language to find something new, although that might happen. It's to take a moment afterwards and say, Pop, what do you got? What do you got? What's going on? Let me tell you, my boss has been yelling at me. And I want to be free of the defects of character, of fear and people-pleasing and fear of financial insecurity. What can I do this morning? And I listen for the voice. And sometimes the voice is go in, make him coffee, and launder his socks, you know. And some days it says, stay the hell away from this guy. He's very troubled. I had this boss who actually hauled off and punched an employee in front of the head of H&R and didn't get fired. That's how sick this organization was. And he finally yelled at me. And I had done my work. I had done my morning meditation. And I walked into his office and I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, oh, the yelling thing's not going to work for me at all. And he said, what? I said, the yelling thing, it's just not something I'll be able to participate in. And I walked out of his office. He looked like as he'd been struck by a stone, you know, and he never yelled at me again. I don't think he knew what that. I think he thought this guy's like crazy and he's going to like bite my face, you know. My boss today is a very troubled guy, and I've done a lot of work on that. Done some work on it. So I'm out at an appointment with him last week, and we're talking to this lawyer. The lawyer closes himself off to me physically, doesn't engage me in the conversation. So I see what's going on. I go, well, I'll just wait. I'll be fine, you know. And my boss, he says, tell him, Scott. And I went, no, I don't want to. My boss goes, what? I said, no, I don't want to talk to him. I don't want to talk to him. And my boss kind of went on. And then slowly but surely, the guy kind of opened up to me and then sort of solicited me and asked me. And I went, oh, okay. And I talked to him. I'm not going to dance anymore. I'm not a trained SEAL. I don't owe these guys anything. I'm going to show up and I'm going to give them a dime for their nickel and I'm going to be a good employee. And I don't have to, bow under that kind of consideration. You know, I really am pleased with what I know. I'm a really good professional. I'm very good at what I do. And I'm not going to talk to people who are not interested in what I have to say. I'm not, and it comes from the model for me at the end of the day is step 12. It's sponsorship. I'm not going to try to sponsor someone who doesn't want to be sponsored. And I know that the secret, part of the big secret of my success as a student in AA is I'm willing to be sponsored. I allow myself to be sponsored. You don't have to do that. I know the guys I sponsor who vigorously, what's the word I'm looking for, aggressively seek sponsorship. Ask questions, want to know what's going on. What do you got? I always bring my new spiritual tools to them because I know that they're hungry for them. I have certain guys who don't want, you know what? Glad you're doing Pem and Children. Glad you're doing Anthony DeMello. Leave me alone. And you know what? Eventually I do leave them alone. And not out of anger. I'm doing my thing, you know. So it's really interesting. Part of my experience with the traditions now is I want to know how to utilize the traditions with newcomers. I never did that before. Now I'm focused on the traditions, on how to implement them in my personal life, treating my family and my friends and children as a group, and applying it to them as a group. I'll give you an example. It says in the third tradition, I'll give you two examples, that the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. Let's say I apply this to my marriage as a group. So the only requirement to be a part of my marriage is a desire to be married. Well, the times when my wife is a moron who should die in a flaming car crash, I'm not willing to be married. I don't want to be married. I need an upgrade to wife 5.0. We need the, so I've lost the right to share. If I'm not a member of AA, I don't have a right to share at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. If I don't even have the desire to be sober, I'm not going to be asked to be a speaker. I've lost the right to share. And believe me, when I'm in that state, there's a lot of sharing I want to do. But I don't even have the desire to be part of it. So I've got to wait till I want to be married again in order to share in that situation. What a great gift that is. Seventh tradition. I have to be self-supporting through my own contribution. So If I need you to do certain things in order for me to be happy, I'm not self-supporting through my own contributions. If I need you to do X, Y, and Z, and if you don't, my son Jesse, when he was, I think, 4, tipped back in his chair. I asked him to stop. He wouldn't stop. I asked him day after day. He continued to tip back in his chair. I asked him, then I screamed at him, then I punished him. Now I'm reduced to screaming at a 4-year-old, you think I'm a moron, you think I'm an idiot, you think I'm crap because you won't listen to me. After getting some direction, discussing it with some people, I got some books. There's a wonderful, wonderful early childhood development. There's Magda Gerber, who I hold in very high regard. She's a proponent of the RIE method of child development. And there's a wonderful doctor who some of you might know named Barry T. Brazelton, who just has written extraordinary stuff about toddlers. And he has a list in one of his books of age-appropriate behavior. So I look up 4-year-olds. And the third thing on the list says, will tip back in chair despite all pleas to the contrary. So now I'm an idiot. And but I was not working the seventh tradition in my resentment in my relationship with my son. My peace of mind and my well-being was contingent on him doing A, B, C, and D. So what a great way. And I want to tell you, there is a way for me to personally apply every single tradition in my relationships as a group, in a wonderful way. And I used to think that, I don't want to bother the newcomer with traditions. It's, too complicated. It's important for them to get on the steps. And I want to tell you, I think it's a gigantic mistake. I don't make that mistake anymore, and I'll tell you why. Most of the complaints for most of the newcomers that I know are complaints about AA. Why does he get to do that? Why do they get to do that? What the hell's that group about? How come that yo-yo gets to tell me that crap, And it's just absolutely fabulous. I can go in and say, well, actually, that's against the traditions. What they're doing is against the traditions. Well, how come they're allowed to do it? Well, we don't, they're traditions. They're not, they're not laws. And but what a wonderful thing to know that their impulse is right, or their impulse is really wrong, But the traditions, for me, one of the things that is just so gorgeous about them and about the steps and about examining resentments, fears, and sexual misconduct is it gets it off me. I stop being the arbiter. I stop being the ruler. What a disservice I'm doing to that newcomer if I make it about me. Then they can blame me. And it's bigger than that. It's bigger than me, I love Al-Anon, and Al-Anon's been a great help to me. One of the ways it's been a great help to me is as a sponsor, because I sponsor men who come from alcoholic families. And I will tell you this. It is my experience that many people, not all, but some people who come from alcoholic families have a little something extra on the table. A little something extra. Is it an excuse? No. Is it an explanation? Yes. Is it something good to be mindful of? It really is. And if I take a look at what happens to friends and family, when you grow up in a house where if you're just smart enough, just pretty enough, just good enough, the sleeper will awake, where you grow up with the notion that they're going to trick me, it's going to happen, believe me, it's going to disappear, it doesn't matter what they say, it doesn't matter what they say, I'm going to get tricked. When you live a life convinced that your problems are outside of yourself, when you live in a world where your problems are outside of you, man, you got to be braced all the time. And it's impossible to resolve things that are arbitrary and outside of you all the time. You don't have any control. There's no sense of well-being. And how many times can a baby bear getting in between the drunk and the drink and vanishing before they believe that they don't exist? And they're either pointlessly aggressive en route to a goal that never gets achieved, or they just throw in the towel and say, what the hell's the use anyway? Why is this good information? Because it's real. So what do you do with a guy who's grown up in an alcoholic home who is angry and injured and hurt? To be mindful of it. Some of the guys I've sponsored who grew up in alcoholic homes, it's very hard for them to sponsor because they're sure that they're being lied to and they're going to get tricked. So we discuss this, we do the inventory about it, and then they've been able to sponsor. 90% of them have been able to turn the corner. And it's been the product in part of mindfulness, of mindful examination, of the inventory process, of putting it on the table. Nothing can bear the light. I believe that the chapter to wives is just a terrible piece of writing and an awful document. It was not written by a member of Friends of Family of Alcoholics. It was written by a drunk. If you read it, it's alarming. It tells you to do things you would never suggest to an alcoholic. It says, if he injures you or if it's trouble, it's okay. Just be patient. It's just crazy. And I don't know about you. I have personally never used it. I've never guided to a member of Al-Anon to it. The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous is not conference-approved literature in Al-Anon. And I'm glad it's not, because if no other reason, it contains the chapter to wives. Now, the chapter to wives has some great information for alcoholics, I believe. And I'm not saying that it's never helped anybody. I'm sure it has. I think it's a bad idea, personally. Although, again, I judge no man, because, as I've told you already a number of times, and I expect you to believe it by this time, I'm too spiritually developed. Also, what's really an interesting thing, which I think is unfortunate and a mistake? The long form of the traditions is actually non-conference approved. It was never adopted by GSO, by the conference. Only the short form, which is really unfortunate because isn't that weird? I was shocked when I found that out. It was never formally adopted, just the short form, which I think is really too bad, because the long form, some of the long forms don't even look like the short form. It's and the long form of the second tradition is actually 2 words shorter than the short form. But anyway, I need to get a hobby or something. So, if you're doing 12-step work and you're dealing with people who have friends and family who have been affected by alcoholism, I would urge you to find out about Al-Anon, if for no other reason than to help you with your 12-step work. If you are sending them to the chapter to the wives, okay, that's fine. I'm suggesting that you get a few more tools in your kit bag. So I put together a little checklist of questions you might ask yourself about this portion of your 12-step work. Here's some questions for you. Do you know anyone who has been affected by the alcoholism of a friend or member of their family? Okay. Second question. Do you try to help alcoholics who have affected other people? Do you know members of Al-Anon? Do you talk with them about Al-Anon? Do you ask questions about Al-Anon? Have you ever been affected by someone else's alcoholism? Have you ever been to an Al-Anon meeting? Have you heard an Al-Anon speaker? Do you know what the 12 steps of Al-Anon are? Have you read any Al-Anon literature? Do you know what conference Al-Anon approved literature is? Do you have a way to help families of alcoholics you are involved with? I think that these are so, so helpful. And if you are trying to help alcoholics who have affected the lives of other people who are living with non-alcoholic people who have been affected by alcoholism, what a great thing to have some tools in your kit that you can guide them to, even if it's to a website. Here's some Al-Anon conference-approved literature. Blueprint for Progress, The Alcoholic Marriage, Courage to Change, the ODAT for Al-Anon, which is the One Day at a Time for Al-Anon, and Lois Speaks. All of these are wonderful, wonderful books, conference-approved Al-Anon literature. I'm not telling you to join Al-Anon. I'm not telling you to be a member of Al-Anon and get an Al-Anon home group. All I'm suggesting that you do for your 12-step work is to arm yourself so that you have some helpful suggestions to make to newcomers whose families are suffering. Not so that they can use it as a weapon or beat them over the head or anything, just so that they will have these tools. They have this literature. I just did an Al-Anon 12-step in Turkey. This woman in Turkey, a friend called me, and they're suffering. And you get the literature in Turkish, and you go to the website and see the Al-Anon meetings in Ankara. It's unbelievable. We did the same thing with the Japanese friend. We made one phone call to Al-Anon central office, and this woman had Japanese Al-Anon literature like that. I mean, it's just absolutely extraordinary. Some of my favorite Al-Anon speakers are Beverly B., Beverly R., Karen A., Winnie E., Ajit. These are just some of my favorites. There are fantastic Al-Anon speakers. I want to tell a tale on Winnie E., which I love. It's not on any of her CDs, but I love this story. Winnie E. has, I think, the single best third step story ever told by anybody about turning it over. It really is. It involves laundry. If you ever get a chance, she's just fantastic. One of the things she says is she didn't want her husband to stop drinking. She just wanted them to mind, which I love. Winnie went to visit one of her nutty kids with another one of her nutty kids. He lived in Germany. So she went over there. Germany apparently is not the heartbeat of Al-Anon. There are not a lot of Al-Anon meetings in Germany, apparently. They're a little behind in Al-Anon. And her kids were driving her crazy. She was getting nuts, and she needed a meeting because all she was hearing was her. And she finally finds an Al-Anon meeting at a American Army base. She travels 5 hours, like on public transportation, to finally get there. And when you're radioactive, your brain's just blowing up, and you got to get out of self. And she's going, "Oh my God, I need a meeting." She gets to the base. She walks in, and just as the meeting's starting, and the secretary says, "We have our monthly speaker meeting," and he turns on a tape recorder to play a speaker tape, and it's a tape of her. And she goes, "Oh no, not me, not me. That's all I'm hearing is me." So she said to herself, "Okay, maybe I said something that'll help me." So she started listening, and this is the beautiful part. This is the traditions part. Her demonstration at the end to get out of self was she decided to not tell anybody there that it was her. It was like Bill being at that meeting where no one knew who the hell he was and working with that new guy. I just love that. I love it a lot. So I wanted to share that about Al-Anon. I wanted to share that about the traditions. Step 12. There's only one difference in the 12 steps of Al-Anon and the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. In the original writing of the 12 steps, in the original manuscript of the Big Book of AA, the 12-step reads, "Having had a spiritual experience as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to others, especially alcoholics." And that was changed, thank goodness. And now our 12 steps says we try to carry this message to other alcoholics. And in Al-Anon it says we try to carry this message to others. It's the only difference. It's that word. Every other step is exactly the same. It's about suffering from alcoholism and encountering a power greater than yourself that can bring about a personality change that can make you connected to people again. And part of the big laughing love that's here. Again, for me, without the 10th step, there is no 12th step. My personal experience is that this good sponsorship, getting a sponsor who refused to play God with me and was willing to walk through all of the things that I've described today in terms of working the steps and his sharing with me his experience, strength, and hope with the steps, I got from this man who refused to play God with me and just kept walking closer to the light. There is no greater assurance against drink than intensive work with other alcoholics. Remember that they are very sick. My experience with new guys is that they act like themselves, And one of the things that's happened to me on a personal level in sponsorship and has mirrored itself on the group level and in my house is entrenched power in Alcoholics Anonymous and entrenched power in my home group is a very dangerous and odious thing. I don't want to have to quit AA to join my home group. I don't. It becomes a very, very small world. And I can honestly say that the same thing can start happening in my house. When my son Micah was 5, before I got sober, my father-in-law, who's a tease and a difficult man, Micah was blowing out the candles on his birthday cake, and he said to Micah, "Do you know the tradition of smacking someone once for every year they've been alive on their birthday?" And And without pausing, my son turned to him and said, "Do you know the tradition of killing your grandfather?" When my older son was 12, he made a mistake. My father-in-law is a right-wing Republican, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's something wrong with trying to beat up a kid with it. That's not good, you know. And Micah made a mistake. He got into a political conversation with my father-in-law. And Micah comes from I met my wife. I got her on the rebound from a Marxist commune. You know, and then my son went down to Chiapas with the Zapatistas. So I'm from like a hotbed of pathology. These people are nuts. They shouldn't even be allowed to talk to each other, really. They're just crazy. And because they go do it. They don't just, you know, you have a talk, you leave the room to go to the bathroom, you come back, they're gone. You know, they're off doing it. And he's working in the labor movement now. I mean, it's just, you know, it's who he is. But he got into a conversation with my father-in-law, and he's too smart. And he humiliated my father-in-law. Not aggressively, but my father-in-law said a lot of stuff, and Micah had the information, and my father-in-law was wrong. And then he did what a lot of bullies do. He lied. He lied because he couldn't bear it. And he looked at my son, and he said a thing that was indefensible. He said to my son, "You know what? I used to think what you think, but I don't anymore, and you won't either." And I saw the air go out of my kid. He just put a pin in him. And he lied to him, and he bullied him, because he doesn't know that that's true. And I waited till he left, because I try to be as kind as I can to him. And I took my sons inside, and I looked at him, and I said, "Boys, I'm just going to tell you, your grandfather just lied to you. He lied to you. Because I not only feel the same way that I did when I was your age, but I feel it more now. And because of my thing in AA, I actually do a lot of stuff because of it. I give money to the organizations I support, and I do that stuff." And that was a direct gift and a direct result of being sponsored in Alcoholics Anonymous. That was the big, loving truth. After the that scalpel, this was the anesthetic of love. I used to sponsor a guy, I'll call him Mike, and Mike was a great guy. And he was one of those guys who came to our group, and he just was one of those guys who he was sleeping on his crack dealer's floor. He looked like he had been fired from a cannon, you know. I once sponsored this punk rocker who was wearing a coat. He came to my house. I was going to go give a talk. He was wearing a coat that said "blank you" on the back. That's what the coat said. And he looked like he just looked devastated. And my wife was in the living room, and I came down with a coat and tie to go talk, and he looked at my coat and tie and went, "You know, that tie isn't right with that shirt at all." We really are remarkable. The guy's wearing like an adult diaper, you know, and he's giving me... adult diapers could have kept me out there a couple of years. I'm glad they didn't really come up with those. So this guy, Mike, came to the group. We got very excited about him. He was a really sweet guy. And he was sober about 2 years. I used to pick him up for the home group every week and drive him over there, and I pick him up one week. And he said, "You know, a couple months ago I met this girl, and she's pregnant. We want to get married and have the baby. What do you think?" And this guy's not a sexual predator. I had no resentments against him. I had nothing blocking him. And you know what? I don't know what the right thing is. I know that I could have thrown a lot of stuff I've heard at him, but I took a breath and I said, "I don't know. What do you want to do? If you don't want to have the baby, I'll support you. And if you want to have the baby and want me to I'll be your best man at your wedding. What do you want to do?" And he said, and they had the baby. And I was the best man at his wedding. And the group, you know, we had we were that kind of group. We had a big shower for him. It's just so great, you know. And the group was excited about the baby. And the baby got born, and the baby was at death's door. She was very, very sick. And she got rushed to this special hospital in L.A., and they just saved her in the nick of time and put her on an awful, intrusive, invasive machine called an ECMO machine. And it's actually surgically attaches the kid's blood because the lungs aren't putting oxygen in the blood. I mean, I'm not going to go into much more detail. I'm just telling you, it was awful. And if you've ever been involved with a sick baby, when a baby this tiny gets disrupted, it's just awful, you know. And in neonatal intensive care, the only people that come in are the family. So her family showed up, you know, 6'6" Ethiopian men, you know, small Asian women, you know. And after a while, the nurses at the station would say, "Don't pause to lie, just go in," you know. And you know, people are just showing up of every shape and size. I'm a cousin, I'm an uncle, I'm their mother. No, I'm their mother. You know, it's just, and then the call goes out for blood. And, you know, most of us can't even give blood because we're either ex-hypes or we got fresh ink. And, you know, but we just go to get pissed off that they won't take our blood, you know. So 2 weeks after the baby's home, they called Mike and they said, they're still coming with blood, man. They're like dropping it off in jars, you know. You should just like tell them that it's okay. And there was a little baby in the next bassinet to her named Rachel Wang, and I hope I never forget Rachel, because Rachel died. And Cassidy didn't. His daughter didn't die. And I want to tell you, I don't have a God who decides which baby he dies and who doesn't. I have a God who's pure love. I don't have a God who's a baby killer. And it's for a reason that I'll find out maybe sometime. That to me is just a crazy idea. My God loves Cassidy and loves Rachel, and Rachel was sicker and moved on, you know. And her family came in and their priest, and they had community. And Cassidy's AA family and Al-Anon family came in, and she had community, you know. And here's the deal. I might have been able to stop that entire thing if I had told this guy what to do. Did that marriage make it? No, it didn't. Wow, a marriage that didn't make it. There's a shock. They've done an incredible job raising this kid. The family is a very loving family. They've been very successful raising this girl who's like 12 years old now. Big, robust, gorgeous kid. The thing is, in sponsorship, in terms of the 12-step, if I had decided that there were certain rules that had to be adhered to, I could have stopped. This is a demonstration that hundreds of people were involved in, where people still talk about, she's got my blood in her. Who the hell could I suppose that I would be to do that? What a crazy, limited idea that I would have. Now, I understand people get scared. We get scared. We want something to rope us in. We want something to make sure they're keeping a lid on it. Keep a lid on it. Help me out. Kick my ass. Pull my covers. It's just a bad job. I mean, if you enjoy it, that's fine. You should live and be well. I ain't signing up. It's not something I want to be involved in. I want to stop suffering, and I like to not be afraid to die. And part of step 11 that has helped me walk that path has been this invitation. And I'm just going to mention a few of my spiritual teachers. I've mentioned a few of them already, but Eckhart Tolle has been a big help to me. And one of the things in the Power of Now that he talks about in the last section of it is about dying. And he talks about turning toward the portal instead of away from it, of being so afraid of fear that you're willing to make a transition. And one of my sweet sponsees, another guy who I got to show up for, we did that together. We did that portion of his teaching together. We talked about being vigilant, about turning towards the light instead of turning away from it. When I held him and said goodbye to him, he had a spiritual ease and a determination to present to the light whatever that meant. And I want to tell you, my experience of him was that he was not scared. My experience of him was that he was willing to surrender to the mystery of step 2, to expose himself to the truth despite the consequences, to turn towards the light instead of turn away from it, and to present himself to the possibility of change. That's a far cry from my idea about this. So I don't know what's in the offing. I don't know what's in store. I'm interested. I'm curious. I'm getting curiouser. One time when we were in New York, when my son Jesse was a little boy, he said, Dad, New York makes me so curious. It's such a great thing. So, my dear, dear friends, I want to thank you so much. I'm not going to ask you to say the Lord's Prayer because some of you might not be able to say it because you have not forgiven. And I don't want to put that pressure on you at the end of the workshop. So, I want to thank you. I'm really quite serious when I say this. Sometimes I do this, and it's not particularly pleasant. Sometimes I do it, and it's a great comfort. I feel very delighted and comforted. And a generosity of heart that I have felt so powerfully. So if we'll just, why don't we rise and join hands and let's say the Serenity Prayer together, and then we're going to have some announcements.
For additional copies of this recording, please contact B&B Tapes at area code 972-317-1020. That's 972-317-1020. Or write B&B Tapes, Post Office Box 1250, Louisville, Texas 75067. Thank you.
My name's Scott Redmond. I'm an alcoholic. And you sure haven't heard me enough today. That was so funny when they said 22 years, and I was just off in my land. And these faces kind of swung around me, which has never happened. And I thought I should have just looked at you and said, I drank at dinner. And but then I would have won, and I would have, congratulations on winning the contest. I hope you never win again. It is like being voted most attractive man on your cell block. It's an honor. I've been at conferences where guys get really excited about having the least amount of time, which I always think is kind of, I'm closer to death than anybody here. And they're giving me a book. But I'm really glad you're here. I'm really, really glad you're here. My hope for anybody who's new is that they, on some level, start to understand the enormity of the opportunity that's been afforded you. Because if you're new and you're not drinking, if you're taking the whooping and you're not drinking, if you're actually accepting your alcoholism and you're not treating it with a drink, because if the craving comes up and I drink, I'm treating my alcoholism with a drink. And it works. Unfortunately, it kills me, but it does work. And if you're not drinking, then you've made the decision on some level to stop treating your own alcoholism. And what I'm doing, in fact, I call it the Serenity Prayer for alcohol, I'm stopping, I'm accepting the fact that I've got a craving, and I'm accepting the craving without treating it. I'm not treating it with a drink. I'm saying, Pop, I'm having a craving, I'm going to accept the craving, and I'm going to take the whooping in hopes that this obsession gets removed. But the obsession can't possibly get removed if I won't accept the craving. And if you're new and you're not drinking, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. The not drinking part is a moose. If it was not for the not drinking part, we would be a much, much bigger organization. There's no question about it. We just would. It's this damn not drinking thing. It screws a lot of people up. There would not be an empty seat in this room if it was not for the not drinking thing. It's like a lot of things. A lot of people want the deal in AA, but it's the not drinking thing, that continues. So, if you're a drug addict, I'd like to welcome you to Alcoholics Anonymous. If you're a dope fiend, which is somehow worse than any of us, I'd like to welcome you to AA. And if you're a crack monster or that's scary, crack monster. I'd like to welcome all the tweakers, if there are any tweakers here. Glad you're here. Love you guys. They stay real quick for a long time, Every part of their face is moving in a different direction. I love you guys. You spook easy, too, tweakers. If you've ever licked all the features off your own face, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. If you've ever masturbated till you're dehydrated, welcome to AA. We're glad you're here. I'd apologize for that, but I'm not sorry. I'm not making fun of you. I'm coming real close, but I'm not making fun of you. I'll tell you why I'm really not making fun of you. I don't care what you got. I don't care if you're the Bigfoot of dope addicts, if you're a dope Goliath, if you're a dope Olympian. I just don't care. Just catch alcoholism. We'd love to give it to you. And I caught alcoholism in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. I did not have alcoholism when I came to AA. For a lot of reasons. Number one, I'm Jewish, and Jews don't drink. You know, they just don't, because it might dull the pain. And you don't want to squander any agony opportunity, you know. And in addition to the Judaism, I couldn't possibly have been alcoholic because I had been in psychotherapy for 18 years. And as I said today, I was going to be dead, but I was going to understand it. And I have no beef with therapy. It says on page 133 of our book, if you need a doctor, go get one. Boy, I wonder what that means. That's really, that's mystical. If you need a doctor, go get one. You know, if you have mental disease. It's an interesting thing. A problem in our society, I believe one of our problems is a lot of therapy, the model for a lot of therapy has swung to behavioral therapy and behavioral modification through medication. It's just true. This is not something I'm making up. It's just true. And because medication is prescribed so much, there's so much of it, I have found as a sponsor, because I don't tell people what to take and what not to take, I have no malpractice insurance at all. And if I get some, maybe I'll start doing that, but I don't have any, you know. But a lot of it's pretty clear to me. If you're taking drugs that affect the central nervous system, Valium, Thorazine, that kind of stuff, that's like pouring honey on your senses. And there's a problem being sober when you're taking stuff that affects your central nervous system, you know. If you're taking painkillers because you think eventually you might be in pain, and you're planning on being in pain at a certain date, and you figure you'll just ramp up for the sucker, that's a problem. I got to tell you the story. I was talking to Brent before. I have alcoholic thinking, and no, really, and it's a terrible thing. And I still have this kind of thinking. It's why I do more in AA at 22 years than I ever did before. I've been hanging out with people who do, when things get good, they do more. When things get bad, they do more. They just do more, you know. And because without it, my alcoholism will go below the horizon, and I will act without reason and without sense. And untreated, I will do that today. So I was 19 years sober, and I had to get this biopsy. They were going to put a 6-inch needle in my side. And I said, what? And the doctor said, well, you know, we'll give you something to relax you. I said, good, you know. My sponsor had told me, he said, if I get hit by a truck, do not read me the 12 and 12. Get me some dope. That's what God made it for. We'll read spiritual literature after I've stopped foaming at the mouth from being hit by the truck, you know. So at any rate, I talked to my sponsor, told him about the biopsy, this, that. They're going to relax me. He said, fine, we're good, because I don't put a pill in my mouth or don't go through anything without committing it to my spiritual advisor. I just don't do it. I don't do any of this alone. And I understand why people go out when they do this by themselves. You know, I don't put a pill in my mouth without someone else involved. And I don't take drugs because I think I'm going to feel a certain way at some other time. At any rate, so I go to, it's an outpatient thing. This was about 3 years ago. I'm 19 years sober, right? And I check in. I said, the lady, you know, I was told that I was going to get relaxed. And she said, well, you know, they do it in there. So I go in there and they take my clothes. And I said, I was, you know, do you do the relaxing thing? Because I was told I was going to relax. And she said, no, but they'll be in. So a guy comes in and puts a line in my arm, and I figure this is obviously the moment of relaxation. And I said, you know, by the way, I was told that I was going to get relaxed. And the guy says, well, they do that downstairs. So I go downstairs, and they put me on this table, and I said, well, move this way, move that way. I said, I'm not moving anyway. All right, I was told that I was going to get relaxed. I am not relaxed in any way, shape, or form. And I have been promised relaxation. I'm not relaxed. And nobody's putting 6 inches worth of needle in me unless I am really relaxed. So there's a lot of eye rolling, you know, which I don't like. I don't like the eye rolling.
when you're on the business end of it. I don't mind rolling my eyes, but I don't like the eye rolling, you know. And they go get the doctor. The doctor comes in, and I go, you know, and he says, I can't give you anything. If I give you, you have to react, respond. When I have that needle in you, you got to breathe or I can nick one of your vital organs. I said, 11 people have told me I'm going to get relaxed. What the hell are you talking about? He said, well, I'll tell you why they said that to you. I said, why? He said, because you look insane. And he said, no one's been willing to say no to you, you know. They're too busy. They got stuff to do. So they're just going, send the big Jew down there, you know, let them worry. Let someone down there put up with what the hell's going to happen when someone says no to this guy. So at any rate, 3 weeks ago, I get told that I'm going to get this same deal. And so I already know what's going to happen. And my doctor tells me, and I say, look, can I call the doctor who's going to do this? Because I just got to tell him I'm afraid I've had this, and it's incredibly painful. It's not like I shouldn't have been relaxed. I mean, it was one of the most painful things. It was like getting shot in the side. So I called the doctor up, and I'm on the phone with him, and I said, you know, look, I know you can't, you know, give me narcotics. And he said, of course I can. I said, what? He said, yeah, I'll give you something to relax you. I said, you gotta be kidding me. So at any rate, things have come full circle. So I committed to Brent. I'm going to have this thing at 7:30 Monday morning. I've committed to Brent. I'm not going to show up at 6 o'clock seeing if I can get some early relaxation, you know. And then maybe by the time they did it, they'll have to do it again. Cause at any rate, I won't be doing that. I had this surgery 2.5 years ago where they did this incredibly invasive surgery on my back, and I know enough people who have taken Vicodin and gone out to know that I need to be extremely vigilant and alarmed about this stuff, and I also know that I don't need to be in mind-boggling pain. So I had a guy counting my pills, a guy looking over my pills, 2 guys who took calls from me during the day anytime I needed to take a pill, and I talked about every one of them that I took. And I got through it just fine. And I'm really glad I took those pills. They drilled 4.5 inches down into my vertebrae and put a bunch of screws and stuff. It was really funny when I went in, and I'm 20 years sober at this time, and this doctor puts my, I had been in a lot of pain for a long period of time, and I go to this doctor, and this heavily accented Russian woman takes a picture of my spine, and she puts it in a box, and she's looking at my picture, and she goes, oh, no. I said, oh, no? What do you mean, oh, no? She said, no disc gone, no disc. I said, how does such a thing happen? She said, bad luck. Bad luck? At any rate, I go inside. The guy says, you're on the brink of losing use of your legs and having kidney failure. And what we're going to do is we're going to open you up from the front, move your vital organs aside. We'll have a cardiologist there to make sure that you don't die. And we're going to work directly into the spine, do a triple fusion, get some cadaver cartilage. And by now I'm going, la, 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 la. I don't want to hear any of this stuff. My name's Scott, and I'm an alcoholic. And I'm a little punchy, I'm a little tired, and I got lost in Surgeryville. I was brought up in the Bronx in New York City to a crazy family. My wife never believed me about my family until she met them. And my mom threw an engagement party for us, and my Aunt Rose came and wore her wig backwards. And it had a bun on it. And I wish I was lying about this because I'm from a long line of morons. And these are my people. This is my genetic pool. So there's not a lot of good news here. And if you got anything for free in my family, it meant it was stolen. And I had an uncle who was a welder at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and he used to get free bales of steel wool. You know, like, here's your paycheck and your complimentary bale of steel wool. And his wife took a decorating course and made throw pillows and filled all of them with the free steel wool. Now, after, it's like the Addams family. I mean, it's just, they're cutting the blossoms off roses. These people are insane. After a while, that stuff works its way through on you. So when you were at their house, if you looked at the room, everybody was moving a little bit. The whole room was like a living, pulsing, breathing organism. They were psycho. There was chronic institutionalization and suicide attempts and mental and physical abuse. And if you're new here, all I've got is good news for you, because my family had nothing to do with making me an alcoholic. Because if they had, then I'd be in pretty damn good shape, because I had good therapy for all those years. And I could have worked out my family problems in therapy, and I'd be all right. I'd be able to drink. But my problem is way worse than that, And I'm not telling you my family didn't make me an alcoholic, because I have a mental obsession coupled with a physical allergy that makes it impossible for me to stop. And I developed this horrible spiritual cancer that almost killed me, that completely baffled me, completely befuddled me, and cut me out from the society of other people. And I'm not saying that my family didn't injure me. I was terribly injured as a kid, and I'm not telling you I haven't had to do a bunch of stuff because of that, and I have. One of the things that happens to me when I sponsor a guy and he's on psychotropic drugs, I mean psychotropic drugs meaning drugs that are not affecting your central nervous system. They're affecting your adrenal system. Zoloft, Sinequan, Paxil, there's a whole bunch of them, Wellbutrin, there's tons of them. One of the things that I love to ask a guy is, what is your diagnosis? Do you have mental disease? Most of them don't have a diagnosis. They've just been prescribed these drugs. I think that's a shame. I think it's a shame to be prescribed a drug that alters your psyche so much, and I think it's criminal, to tell you the truth. Now, if you've got depression, well, I've got depression. A lot of people have depression. If you have bipolar disease, if you have serious pathology, if you're schizoid, if you're any number of things, you have real mental disease, and that should be treated by all means. Now, I have sponsored men who have gotten off these drugs, but one of the really interesting things, again, is what is your diagnosis? And when a guy says, my diagnosis is, well, that's great. That's great information. I am telling you, it's a fraction of the men that I've dealt with actually have a diagnosis. And the ones that do have a diagnosis, they really need to be on these drugs. I have men I sponsor who I don't know where they would be if they weren't treating their mental illness. They certainly wouldn't be in AA helping other people. That's for damn sure. And again, I have no malpractice insurance at all. So I was terribly injured. It's funny, right before I got sober, I went to a psychiatrist, and he said, I want to get you on some drugs. And I said, you know what? Actually, I'm okay on drugs. Got lots of drugs. Matter of fact, would you like some drugs? Because I got drugs up the wazoo here. I was kind of thinking I told my therapist I wanted to take less drugs, which I think is just hysterical. I would like to take less drugs. Can you imagine somebody actually helping you do that? Let's cut your heroin intake in half. Let's just knock half the heroin off. How much heroin you taking every week? Let's try to cut that down. At any rate, I started drinking at a really young age, and I have the allergy, and I've got it bad, and it started really early. I tried to get into a gang when I was a kid. I failed gang. I was hanging out with some kids. In those days, and for those of you as ancient as me, you'll recall there Chevy Biscaynes and Fairlanes used to have a ignition on the column that said off, on, and lock. So I was being brought into this group of brilliant young men who were stealing cars and having demo derbies. Really upward movement in this group. This is really a bunch of geniuses. And stealing cars, just smashing them into each other. And there's a ring of guys around me. This guy George is bringing me into the group. He said, look, if the car's on, knock out the fly window. This is when there were fly windows. Get into the car. And if it's on off, put your house key in the car and turn it on and drive away. You could do that. He said, if it's on lock, shine it and get another car. And I looked around the circle. I kind of wanted to make my bones. And I said, what if it's on? He said, then someone's in the car, you moron. And I failed Gang 101. I was... there was a hippie recruiting station across the street, and there was no paperwork at all. They let me in. There were just no questions at all. And I didn't want to be an alcoholic, and I overcame my alcohol problem with marijuana. I'd like to welcome all the pot smokers here tonight. You remember WOW, right? WOW. WOW. And right after WOW usually came, what? What? Wow. What? Wow. What? Wow. What? Wow. What? Watching a pot smoker is like watching a dog try to run on linoleum. There's like a lot of activity, but no movement at all. They just can't get a claw in the rug. You know, they just can't do it. I overcame that pot problem with pills, and I kicked that pill problem with cocaine. Cocaine is an excellent drug. It's particularly good for sex if you enjoy sex from the Neolithic period. And I overcame that gall-darn cocaine with heroin. Heroin's a very dark, complicated, artistic drug. Then you cross a line and become a vomiting pig. And and alcohol was on the table every day. My friend Carl M. says this thing that I just love. It's about talking about drugs and AA. He says, why do we go to a speaker meeting where a guy says, well, I was imprisoned. I was sodomized by men. I sodomized other men. And now I'm sorry, but I'm going to talk about drugs. It's very funny to me. But at any rate, I was in a cycle where I was using intravenous drugs, and I talked about it this afternoon. My father had a massive heart attack, and I was taken to the hospital, and I couldn't show up for my old man the night that he died, and it was just one of those horrible nights where I got it. I got how bad it was. I got what a pig, what an animal I had become. And I couldn't fit the pain in my head. I couldn't bear it. I couldn't show up for him. I couldn't even go give him a kiss, you know. And I had to do some really fast work in my head because I couldn't be that guy. I couldn't be the animal who couldn't be there for his dad. And I came up with it quick. It was needles and heroin, and all I had to do was never put a needle in my arm again, and I wouldn't be that guy. I'd be another guy, but I wouldn't be that guy. And I didn't, not for 13 years. Didn't touch the stuff. And shortly after that, I was acting in a Broadway play in New York. I got to do some really incredible stuff a time. I never got to do any of it more than once because when I'd leave, they'd move the business, so I couldn't find it again, you know. And this new usherette with long brown hair walked in. I took one look at her and walked into the dressing room of this play and got up on a chair and said, if anybody talks to the new usherette with long brown hair, I'll break all the bones in your hands and feet. And we started a life together. We hadn't even talked. And we had a great time in New York. Early 20s, acting on Broadway. We just had a fantastic time. We didn't know that we were just a couple of dogs trying to run on linoleum. And Nancy got very ill from prolonged exposure to me. And we had these 32-ounce iced tea tumblers in the house. I came home one night and I popped a cork on a bottle of wine and emptied the entire bottle of wine into this cup. And I turn around and my wife's giving me her pre-Al-Anon rat face. And I said, what? And she said, what are you doing? And I looked at her in the eye and I said, I'm having a glass of wine. Can't a man have a glass of wine in his own home? I was having a beaker of wine is what I was having. Having a vino big gulp. And the alcoholic life becomes the only normal one. Our beautiful son Micah was born, and we were surrounded by friends and family and got a ton of phone calls. He was really welcomed into our community, you know. And just 2 years and 9 months after that, when our son Jesse was born, nobody came to the hospital. There were no phone calls, no flowers. We had become completely isolated by the disease of alcoholism. And it wasn't because people didn't love us. It just hurt too much to be around us. You know. We pressed ourselves on the people that loved us like a thumb upon a bruise. And that night, Jesse was sick. He had transitive tachypnea of the heart and wound up in neonatal intensive care. And I got a call from the hospital that night. And this doctor who I'd never met before said, "Your wife's all alone." Now, you guys know, you might know, there's no better way to be in a hospital than on the maternity ward when things are okay. It's a wonderful place. A lot of warmth, a lot of celebration. People are really being invited into their community. There's a sense of family. I'm not saying as a rule, but in general, you know. And there's not many places worse than when you've got a life that's like a tiny little awfully painful paper cut. And this doctor said, "Your wife's in psychological duress, your baby's sick, there's no one here. Where are you?" And I said, "You know what, I can't find anybody to watch my 2-year-old son." Micah was 2'9" at the time. And this doctor who I had never met before said something pretty remarkable to me. She said, "You know what?" And this is a big metropolitan hospital. She said, "My husband's home. I'll give you my address and my phone number. You can take your son to my house, and my husband will watch him so you can come down here." And I said, no. I couldn't. I had no tools to accept this woman's generosity. That's how thick the ice around my heart had become. It was the terrible night my son was born. Wow, what a thing to say. And it's the truth. It was the terrible night my son was born. It was part of my terrible days. And little were we to know from that awful night that it was going to continue for 3 more years. Bill talks about it so beautifully in his story. You know, he talks about stealing from his wife's purse when she comes home, being too much of a coward to swallow poison, dragging his mattress down to the bottom floor of his brownstone so he wouldn't pitch himself out the window. And he says, little were we to know it was going to continue for X more years. You know, you think you hit it, you think you're sucking the steely bottom of your life, and you just take a shovel out. You know, a little were we to know it was going to continue for 3 more years. By the time I got to Alcoholics Anonymous on April 22nd, 1985, our sons were 6 and 3. My wife was a tongue-chewing, babbling idiot from prolonged exposure to me. I was dying. My careers in show business were gone. And a couple of years before I got sober, Micah was 4 or 5 years old, and he came to me. We had this Christian family move next to us, and their son used to talk about God in just a lovely way. In that lovely way, a familiar way. God was part of this kid's life. People talked about God in this kid's home. He had a relationship, a very open, free, relaxed relationship, talking about God. And my son Micah came to me at about 5, and he said, "Dad, is there anything such as God?" And I looked into the eyes of my perfect baby boy, and I said, "No. He should have been taken from me. I don't think there's any higher form of child abuse. I never laid a hand on him that I can remember. I don't remember everything. But I know I crippled my kids pretty good. I thought I was saving him some skin so he wouldn't have to be played like a sap or a sucker by those yo-yos out there. I gave him the real existential party line, something every 5-year-old is famished for." And I lied to him. I stood in the presence of all this immutable law, all this poetry underlying everything. And I said, no. Even worse than that, I told a baby, in essence, you know when it's dark and you're terrified and you can't go to sleep? Tough, because that's all there is. That's really the message. That's the horrible message. This crazy idea that I'm separate. Crazy idea. And if I don't find, and that's my ego, if I don't make sure I'm separate, I'm going to get annihilated. I'm going to get sucked up. I'm going to disappear. I'm not going to be part of the connective tissue. You know, I was talking about fellowship before. And to me, fellowship is the freedom to move in and out of contact with my brothers and my sisters with a sense of freedom, no attachment, no craving. and wearing it like a loosely fitting garment and being able to move in and out of that almost effortlessly, because it's not about us. It's not personality. The love is not personality specific. It can't be, you know. And on April 22nd, 1985, I crossed the line I swore I would never cross again. I put a needle in my arm, and my world came crashing down around me. Now, I want to tell you, that's a mystery to me, because many other days I just would have made it okay to put a needle in my arm again. I just would have moved the whole world. I used to sponsor this guy. I sponsored him for about 15 minutes. And he was married. He was a male prostitute, and he had a gay lover. And he called me to tell me he drank, and I said, why? And he said, I caught my wife cheating on me. He was a male prostitute, he had a gay lover, and he drank because his wife cheated on him. Now, unfortunately, I understand that. And what I mean by that, you got to move the whole world to make that happen. You got to move the whole world. You got to cut and paste reality. You got to move the whole world to somehow, in that landscape. So I understand why was it not okay for me to pick up the needle again? It's a mystery to me, an absolute mystery to me. But my world came crashing down around me. I called my therapist of record in my 18th year of psychotherapy, and I told him what I had done. And he said to me, I didn't know it at the time, but he said to me virtually the exact same thing that Carl Jung told a guy named Roland Hazard. He was an American millionaire who was dying from alcoholism. His family had the wherewithal to send him to Switzerland to be analyzed by one of the fathers of modern psychology, Carl Jung. That's a pretty great prescription to get, you know. And Jung analyzed the guy, and the guy drank right after. And when Roland Hazard came back to Jung, devastated that this happened, Jung said, you know, the only thing I can suggest is we institutionalize you, or you hire a bodyguard. You know, that's all we can do. And Jung said, is there nothing else? And Hazard said, is there nothing else? And Jung said, you know, there have been examples of alcoholics of your description having spiritual rearrangements. Jung had an idea called the collective consciousness. We call it the group conscience, as God presents in the group conscience. Jung called it the collective conscience. He had such a beautiful, Jungian therapists, many of them have a beautiful idea about a spiritual community, you know. And Jung said to this guy, I've been trying to bring about such a change in you, and I have failed. And Hazard said, well, you know, I'm in my church. It'll be okay. And again, Jung said, I wish that was enough. And I'm really talking about a rearrangement. And Roland Hazard went out and got himself a spiritual rearrangement in a group called the Oxford Group. Carried the message to the guy who 12-stepped Bill Wilson. So it was a direct line from Carl Jung. I didn't know that at the time, but at the time my therapist said, there's absolutely nothing that can be done for you. And I said, what? He said, I can't help you. The only thing I can suggest is you attend a meeting of Narcotics Anonymous. Well, first he said, the only thing I can suggest is that we institutionalize you. Now, on most other days, I'm good for the institution. That's fine with me. That's better than dental surgery. That's an uninterrupted source of narcotics for a period of time. I'm good with that. We're good all day and all night with that. And then he said the thing that Jung couldn't say. He said, or you attend a meeting of Narcotics Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous. And why I went to the AA meeting, I couldn't tell you. I absolutely couldn't tell you. But I went there. And I went into this meeting in the deep San Fernando Valley in a group called Unit A, and I took one step into the room, and I looked around, and I said, oh, my God, how did I wind up in Alcoholics Anonymous? Alcoholics Anonymous. How lame is this? This is beyond lame. This is beyond church, beyond synagogue. This is some plateau of lameness I never even imagined was available to me. Alcoholics Anonymous. And the room looked like it was the product of 200 years of inbreeding to me. I mean, there were like identical twins carving their initials on each other's feet in the back of the room, or so it seemed to me. And everything was a miracle. I'm a miracle. You're a miracle. It's a miracle. A big miracle. Oh, the furniture, the coffee's a miracle. It's just a miracle, miracle, miracle. And I'm waiting for the Jew hunt to break out. You know, I know that's going to start. Come on, Jaime, strap these antlers on. Always wanted to run a big buck Jew. Then the AA unsolicited advice guy, he got me at the end of the meeting. You know him. He's wearing a belt buckle large enough to serve an entire fish on. Do I want what you've got? No. But thanks for spitting on me. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Clyde. I'll come back next week. We'll hook a rug, you know. Do I bring my own bib overalls? Am I issued a pair? Let's just die. Let's just die right now. I hated everything about that meeting. My skin crawls. I felt my DNA unraveling. I just couldn't believe it, you know. And I went back to that group every morning for a year. And because I was out of plans. I just was out of plans. If you're new here, I pray for you that you're out of plans. If you have a plan, it's probably a beaut. Don't use your plan. Grab one of us after the meeting and tell us your plan. We want to know the plan. My favorite newcomer plan, and it's the single most utilized plan that I've seen in all this time, is the one more dope deal to set myself up financially for sobriety plan. That's out there. That's going to wind up on the soft literature rack eventually. That sucker's out there. Gets a little more popular the closer you get to Lee Trevino Boulevard, I think. It's good. What town is that in again? Thank you. El Paso. When I shared that in El Paso, a lot of people looked at their feet when I talked about the one more dope deal to set yourself up financially for sobriety. And I was out of plans. I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous. My wife reached out to the Al-Anon family groups and got a sponsor named Ruby, who's a gorgeous, adorable woman who I adore, and it's still Nancy's sponsor, and I love this woman more, I can tell you. She never did anything but love me, you know. We used to go to their house, and I'd just be radioactive. I felt like there was no skin on me, and I'd look around this house with all these people bringing food and having fun. You know the house. If you've been to that house, you know that house. And I'd stand there and think, you know, I'm so happy for them. You know, but we're just too busted up. We had these crazy rules for our kids. You know, they couldn't eat sugar, cuss, or watch TV. So my wife would give them a good health food breakfast and put them in the car with me, Dr. Death, you know. Say, hope you live. You've had your granola. You're ready for your adventure now. With Psycho Dad, you know, who is either drunk, planning on getting drunk, hungover, or pissed off that he's not drunk. It's one of the four. There's not a lot more colors on the palette, you know. And Nancy would take him over to Ruby, and Ruby would give him a big bowl of M&Ms, turn on the TV, put on the Love Boat, and I'm going to cuss twice. I apologize in advance. And Ruby'd say, boys, if you say thanks, you get more shit. I go, wow, chocolate, TV, and cursing. This is like, it doesn't get any better than this. This is fantastic. And because, you know, you got a lot of rules. When you can't control the central piece, you try to put lipstick on the pig. You try to control the rest of the deal, you know. And Ruby's husband, Milton, who at the time I think was 7 years sober, he's at over 30 years now. And Milton called the boys over when they were little boys. And I want to tell you, my son Jesse's 25. My wife asked him for something a couple months ago, and he said, you know, Mom, if you say thanks, you get more shit. And Milton had the boy, he motioned him over. This is my last cuss. And he bent down and he whispered to them, boys, your parents don't know shit. And the kids went, oh my God, we've suspected, but now it's been confirmed. This is like fantastic. And there's more cursing and chocolate. This is so great. They love going to Ruby's house. One time Michael was eating chocolate and watching TV, and he said to Nancy, I love this program. It's just Wonderful, wonderful. We needed to be lightened up. We were flat and gray and wooden. We needed you to pry our jaws open and breathe some life into us. And we made a beginning. You guys said don't get involved in your first year, and we didn't. We stayed the hell away from each other. I had nothing to bring to my marriage at all. I either screamed until she shut up or I cried until she shut up. I like to loom. I'm a loomer. I'm big. I like to loom with a light behind me so I get her in a shadow. I've always liked that. It's like total eclipse of the Jew if I get her like right in the pocket there. That's the Scott Redmond Relationships Workshop right there. Scream, cry, loom. There you go. Talk to her until she changes her mind. That's it. Just talk to her until her eyes roll back in her head and she keels over. And on the way down, she goes, oh, okay, and then just falls over. That's my communication skills at that time. I'm not trying to bring anything to the deal. I'm very sick. And I stuck around for 6 months, and I knew I was going to drink because I had seen the drill hundreds of times in just 6 months. People came in and changed and did the work. People came in and didn't change, didn't do the work, got sick, got sicker, got to the podium, shared their gift with us, shared their hess right out the door, or just stayed here and became columns of human sewage and sexual predators, although I judge no man. But you know that because I've said it so many times today. And I knew I was going to drink. And my kids had become less frightened of me. And I had one of the horrible things I remembered was some months before I got sober, I was hungover and I was with my older son who was 6 at the time, and I got sick in front of him from being hungover. And my son saw me get sick, and it made him sick, and he got sick in front of me. And it was just, again, one of those moments where I got it, where I stood still long enough to appreciate the horror of what had happened. My son got sick not because he had eaten bad food and not because he had the flu. It was because he was with me. He was with his father, and that was the only reason that he got sick. And I don't know that it taught me anything, but I know that it created a window of opportunity for me, you know. And I asked the guy to sponsor me. Good guy, really great guy, still is a great guy. And he made sure I'd done some reading from the Big Book of AA, and he invited me to his house, and he read me chapter 5. And on the way through, it took me through the first 2 steps. We reached step 3 and said a prayer on our knees. And they went back, and he gave me instructions on how to do a 4th step in the Big Book of AA. And I will tell you that I stopped feeling like I was stealing someone's chair here. Anytime I'm at a step study and somebody shares and they say, well, I've never worked this step, but I always wonder, but what? What exactly are you going to be talking about? It's about this step. You've already told us you haven't worked the step, but at any rate, because of my non-judgmentalness, it doesn't bother me at all. So it's a problem for lesser developed spiritual people. At any rate, I was working the steps, so I actually could participate, felt part of. The conversation and the reading took on new meaning for me because it was backed up by practical experience. You know, it's that old thing you hear in 1,000 meetings, and for me it's been so true. I read the big book after having certain experiences, and all of a sudden they changed the book. You know, there's all this stuff that leaps out of me because if there was ever a non-intellectual pursuit, it's Alcoholics Anonymous. If there was ever a hands-on treatment based on personal experience, it's Alcoholics Anonymous. I've never seen anything like it. You know, certainly in no other medical treatment that I've ever seen in my life. I did my inventory in 3 months. I went and I read it to my sponsor. I did step 6 and 7, which I so enjoyed talking about this afternoon, about how it's really become the fulcrum for my working, breathing, developing relationship with my higher power. And I wrote up my 8-step list, and I didn't know what the hell I was going to do about it. My kids were down there, my dad was down there, and I didn't know what the heck I was going to do about it, and I didn't have a sponsor who was going to tell me. And he said, just do your job in AA. And as I told you, my boys were really busted up, you know. And I had to do some really embarrassing stuff I didn't want to do. I had to go into their school and advocate for them. It was really embarrassing because they were in bad shape. And sometimes my sons were and are extremely intelligent, and they tested their IQ is just way up there. And for some teachers, it's very disheartening and very frustrating because they were so sick that some of the teachers, a few of the teachers, were angry at my sons for squandering a gift that they felt that if some other kids who tried real hard but who didn't have the capability, that it was being wasted on my sons. That if it was in the hands of these other kids who found themselves wanting with intelligence but had the industry. You know, one teacher said, I just want to shake them. I just want to grab them and shake them. And I said to her, you know what? We're all shook. We need help. Can you help us? My sons are really sick because they've been living with me, and I've been really sick. And we are making a beginning. Can you help us? And not one time did anyone say no. I mean, there were teachers who were difficult and angry at my kids and not interested in helping, but the institution helped. And they said, absolutely, we'll test the boys. The boys got tested, and they needed help. It was for real. Their small motor stuff was messed up. They couldn't put together small tasks. And there was nothing organically wrong with them. They were scared all the time. This fear was so disruptive that they couldn't even put small tasks together after a while, you know. And I didn't know. I hadn't read our literature. I didn't read about the warped lives of blameless wives and children. And if you don't think that you've affected anybody in your alcoholism, maybe you drank in a cave. Maybe you drank in a Ziploc bag. I don't know. I didn't. I unfortunately was in contact with a lot of people. And they got special ed. And the special ed teachers said, well, let's get them into music. Let's get them into sports. Let's see if some of the big motor stuff will shake down and impact some of the small motor stuff. And Jesse wanted to play drums. And I didn't have any money. Drums cost a lot of money. But my kid said he wanted to play drums. I went to the music store, and I bought him a drum pad. Drum pad is a piece of wood with a piece of rubber on it and a couple of sticks. My kid had expressed a desire to do something, and I had backed him up, just with a couple of booze bucks. That's all I had. And I went back to my home group, and I told the guys what I had done. For the same reason, if you've got that kind of home group, you would too. I wasn't bragging. They were really interested in my family. They were really rooting for us. They wanted to know. They were really interested in us. And I told them what happened. And I was really proud of myself, you know. I spent a couple of dope dollars to get my kids into the Little League. We had become uncivilized. You know, we tried to do that a couple of times, but, you know, you got to drive the kid and pay attention and get places on time, and, you know, and we ran out of gas. So get them into the Little League, you know. And first game I went to, my wife comes to the game, and she looks over in the stands. There's everybody in the stands, and there's me alone in the sun going just insane, you know, just going up and down 2 hat sizes. I got a vein on my forehead pumping like a garden hose, you know. I'm here, I'm doing my job, I'm here. The kids are thrilled, you know. They're looking and going, Mr. Redmond's going to blow up, man. Look at that. That's unbelievable. And you know what? It took me a couple of years until the voices diminished in volume and number, until I just got to go sit in the stands with the people, just to be at my sobriety station, just to go and sit down and be at my sobriety station. And a couple of years after I did that, my son Jesse received one of the great compliments a human being can receive, I believe, on this planet. He was intentionally walked. Now, if you're a fan, you know that means that they're scared of you and they want to get to the weenie behind you. And he didn't want to jump up and down and be a geek. And, you know, he just laid down his bat. He trotted up the first baseline. And on the way up the first baseline, he looked at me and he just shot me just a little bit of stuff. It's the old man. You don't want to be lame. Don't spoil him, you know. And I could have missed the whole thing. I'm not telling you that my son Jesse got intentionally walked because I'm sober. I'm telling you I was at the game because I'm sober. And I've been with enough guys who have been drunk on their kid's birthday again, and I tell them about the day my son got walked because I was there. I was lucky enough to be there. I could have had to work too, but I was lucky enough to be there at my sobriety station. And I told the guys in the group that I got Jesse this drum pad, and there were a lot of burnout drummers in our group at that time. And And like within 3 months, the AA drum set showed up at our house. And they're like, these guys showing up with these Megadeth drums, you know. Dude. And Jesse had a drum set that when he sat behind, he disappeared. You couldn't even see him. Hear this little voice going, 1, 2, 3. Gigantic drum set. And Micah, same thing happened with Micah around keyboards and stuff like that. And some years ago, I got to go to the House of Blues on the Sunset Strip in L.A. and see my kids burn the dump down. Just walk out on the stage of the House of Blues in the heart of Hollywood, playing to this packed room, 800-900 kids playing hip-hop music, elbow to elbow, and burnt the dump down. And over to the side, there's this group of middle-aged weeping alcoholics, you know. The kids are kind of going, what is with the crying old people, man? That is kind of creepy, you know. And they look like they've been around the block a few times, too. It's a little odd. And that's their AA and Al-Anon aunts and uncles that have been following them around. At that time, it was for about 17 years, you know. I was about a year sober, and I started sponsoring a guy named Roland. And I still sponsor him. I've sponsored him for 21 years. And he used to call our house every night, and he'd leave a message on our machine. He'd say, Scott, it's Roland. I'm sober. I love you. Good night. And he'd hang up. And about 5 years later, my son Micah came to me, and he said, you know, Dad, I should tell you that when I was a little boy, I couldn't fall asleep until I heard Roland's voice on the machine. And this was the kid I said there was no God to. I told him there was no God. I tried to rip God out of his life. And you guys came in over the answering machine. You tucked him in every night. And I think some nights he stayed up till he passed out because he was so scared. But there was one thing that he knew. He absolutely knew. He knew that Roland wouldn't call me if I was drunk. That he knew. He knew that Roland was calling me as the man that was helping him. And he knew that Roland wouldn't call me if I was drunk. And he knew everything was okay, and he'd go to sleep. And we don't even know what we're doing half the time when we do it, you know. It's just absolutely remarkable when you throw a pebble in the pond. I was sober about a year. I was kind of becoming a spiritual Goliath at that time. And I had started sponsoring some guys and was thinking about writing a few appendices to the big book of AA. And, I was compiling my notes at that time and rewriting the chapters to the wives and a number of other things. And I got an overture made to me. I had a ghostwriting job at that time at 20th Century Fox. And I was being considered to have a staff directing job on a situation comedy at one of the major studios. And I thought, oh, my God, this is such a great opportunity for the program. Because if I get this job, it's just going to be so great for my sponsees. Because they'll see the program in action. They'll really see it working, you know, as I prosper thusly. And I directed one episode, and I didn't get the job. And I almost drank. And I was humiliated. I went to this company picnic, and I was offered a beer by the producer, and I didn't come to that picnic to get to bring anything. I was there to get something. And he said, hey, have you had one of these? And I said no, and I took a beer and I walked away, and I said, you're a dead man. I guess the wind hit my face. I said, you're dead. And I put it down, and I walked away. I called my sponsor, and I told him what had happened. And he said to me, well, I guess that you have the show business God. And I said, what? He said, well, what keeps you sober? I said, God. He said, okay, God gets you sober, keeps you sober, and you didn't get a show business job and you almost drank. So I guess you have the show business God, and he has abandoned you utterly. Now, when I came into AA, I heard God getting people in relationships, God getting people jobs, God getting people parking spaces. And I went, oh, no, not the parking space, God, not the parking space, God. And if you have a parking space, God, and he gives you a space, pass it on. No. And it's a funny thing. We got We got nailed in the Northridge earthquake really bad. We got really badly injured. We were at the epicenter. Our house got creamed. I got a bad physical injury. And shortly after the earthquake, we were at this AA function out of town, and this woman who used to live in Los Angeles walked up to me at the function, and she said, "Oh, I'm so glad God got us out of L.A. before the quake." And I said, "Oh, so he likes you. He likes you, but we're crap, but he likes you." And she said to me, "I guess he just felt you had some lessons to learn." I'm out of here, man. I have no desire to stay sober in that world. I can't live in a world where I've got a God saying, "Get him, get the Redmond boy, get him, no evacuation plan for you, Jew boy, get him, turn his wife to salt, kill his goat, put a finger in his eye, get him, smote his ass, smote anyone he talks to. We'll figure it out later." It's lesson time. It's like God is some deranged game show host, you know? Let's key your car. You're due for a rash. It's boils for you. And there's a reason for your rash. You'll figure it out later. Maybe. I can't live in that world. I can't. I believe the mystics. I believe the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I believe that no one can fully comprehend or define that power which is God. I believe St. Thomas, who says in his tract on mysticism and on faith, the first sentence is, "To know God is to not know God." Every time someone ascribes an intention or a personality to God, they take this incredible radiance, which my life is renewed by the power of daily, this mystery, and they make it this big, this big. Now, this mystery is something that used to terrify me, and it's something that if you try to take it away from me, I won't let you. I won't let you. I don't think that God killed Rachel Wang for a reason. I think Rachel Wang got really sick and she moved on. I don't think there's a beginning and an end to any of this. I can't live in that world. Is it true? I don't know. It's where I am with it. I want as much oxygen in my world as I can get. So when my sponsor said, "You know what, I had to write the inventory, I was resentful at them for not giving me the job." See, my God expects me to do my job in AA. My sons are 25 and 28. My older son, in 2 weeks, I'll go to Ithaca, New York, and watch him graduate the graduate school at Cornell University for public policy. My 25-year-old son has received a 5-year fellowship to receive his doctorate in mathematics at Stanford. I cannot believe that this is because God likes us more than the people whose children have been annihilated. I will not live in that world. It's not a world that I'm even vaguely interested in. It's just what's happening in my house. My God expects me to do my job in AA if my children survive or if they don't. That's not an indication of God's love for me. My indication of God's love for me is how I move through that thing. I have dear, dear people in my life who are so important to me who have had that experience. And I have had the honor to watch them walk through that pain and that grace and that experience. You know, and boy, that's a big world. I like that world. I can live in that world. And my sponsor said, "You know, when you do 6 and 7 on this 10-step, because I had to write those resentments against myself for almost drinking and all that stuff, he said, you better have a talk with your higher power about what the hell you're going to do." And I did. And in 6 and 7, after I read the inventory and read the fears and read the defects, I said, "Pop, you got it. Take show business. I'll do anything. I'm willing to do anything for a living, and I'm not going to make my sobriety contingent on that. Take show business." And within 3 months, I was working as a cook on a catering truck. And I looked up to God and I said, I did not mean this. I didn't. We've had some kind of grotesque misunderstanding. This wasn't even like on the long list. I don't know where the hell you came up with this. Now, in Los Angeles, when they make a TV show or a movie, they hire a caterer, and you follow the group around, and you make them food. And it's a great job. You make a ton of dough. It's Teamster dough. You're on a movie set on a vehicle. You make a lot of money. But I'm Scott Redmond, you know. And the first movie that I cooked on, the executive producer and star of the movie was a guy who I had worked with in the business. And he stuck his head on the truck that morning, and he said, can I have a burrito, Scott? And I said, what's happening, babe? And he said, is this your truck? I said, no, but it's my spatula. I went home and I called my sponsor and I said, oh, we're getting the gift now. Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. This gift is so beautiful. And he said, sounds like you've got a resentment. Well, they go to workshops to learn this stuff, you know. I'm resentful at Scott for working on a kitchen truck. It affects my self-esteem, pocketbook, ambition, personal relations, and sex. A 5-bagger for sure. What are the defects? Well, I'm impatient. Things aren't moving along. I have false pride. I'm ungrateful. I'm working and I'm making a ton of dough. I'm a mind reader and a people pleaser. I'm greedy. I'm not trusting in God. And I wrote it and I read it. And then I wound up serving people who had been my assistant directors, actors I had directed in soap operas, people who had been my stage managers, and I would come back to my group with a new tale of humiliation every week. And the guys would just go, ho, 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 ho. Just tears streaming down their face, you know. And I got to help some guys who felt they had fallen from a height. They hadn't reached the top rank in AA, which is child of God, you know. And I had one friend named Paul who felt he had fallen from a height, and we did some work together and did the inventory and got straight with it. And he had this prayer he'd say, Pop, I'm willing to do anything for a living, but please don't let it be as bad as what you did to Scott. And I was just so glad to help him out. And I'll just tell you this one little quick sidebar. This guy who had been the star of the sitcom that I had not gotten the job on, I look up and he's walking in as a newcomer in AA. And I got some issues here. And I needed to get rid of them, and I did the inventory. And subsequently, he heard me share, and he asked me to help him in AA. And I asked him to come to my house, and he came over late. Now, on my inventory, my original inventory, when I was a little boy, between the ages of 5 and 10, there was a neighborhood bully named Mark. Mark used to kick my ass every day. He humiliated me at our first kind of mixer parties, spin the bottle parties, that kind of stuff. And he just used to wake up and say, "Where's Scott?" and come kick my ass. And I had about a dozen items on my inventory about this guy. Anyway, that's the Bronx. This is Los Angeles. This guy, the star of the sitcom, comes and he's late to my house so I can start him and I can bring him to God. We're going to move towards God together. I'm so good. God, I'm so good and so spiritually developed. And he comes and he says, geez, I'm sorry I'm late, but our new director, that's my job. It's a new director. That's the job that I should have had. Our new director teaches an acting class. This guy, Mark, and it's him. And now I'm going, get a hobby. You know what I mean? Take up knitting or something, but get off me, because it was just too damn funny. And you know what? I didn't tell my buddy what was going on at the time. I waited years later, and I did tell him. We both laughed. I think he laughed a little harder than me. But I thought my sons and I would get close, on Oscar buffing night, the night we would buff my awards. I thought that's when we would grow very intimate. And the fact is my kids wanted me to teach them how to cook. And Jesse and I have been cooking together for 20 years. And he still calls me, and I talk him through sauces, and it's one of the great joys in our life. I didn't know that was going to happen. That's not the way I would have planned it. And I learned how to show up and give them a dime for their nickel, and I did a lot of 10-step work to fight off this feeling of humiliation. One day, when you're on this job, you do everything. You're the chef, you're the cleanup guy, and I walked around, and there's garbage all over me and garbage on the ground, and I see this guy, and he was the last assistant director I had when I directed a sitcom. And I went and I hid behind the truck. And we all have those moments. I think we all have those moments. Many of us have those moments where God is truly everything or he's nothing. And I stood behind this truck and I said, you know what, man? You're either going to hide behind this truck for the rest of your life, or you're going to go out there and do what a cook does on this job and clean up. And I went around, and Lenny was very happy to see me. He was very happy to see me. And I wiped my hand. I shook his hand. I said, it's really good to see you. And I went and I cleaned up. And I want to tell you, man, I've been okay cleaning up since then. And And I cooked for about 3 years, and I had this overture made to me by a company called Ketchum Public Relations. And it's a big-time comedy writing job. And I'm telling you, if I got this job, it would be so good for the guys I sponsor. And I'll tell you why. Hold it. Because they would have seen me suffer, through those. And now, right? You see what I'm talking about, right? So I had to do a videotape for these guys. And I went mad. I just, not living in today, just greed, the whole deal. And my brain blew up before I even found out about the job. I got straight. I wrote it. I read it to my sponsor. We had a good yuck. Maybe he laughed a little harder than me, but we had a good yuck. And I was cool. I had released it. And then I got a call from Ketchum that I didn't, and I had done a videotape for these guys that I did not get the job. And I was good. And then I get a call to cater some commercials in the mountains above L.A., and I hop in the truck and get up there. And I grab the call sheet, which is this piece of paper, gives you all the information about the shoot. And I see that the commercials are for Ketchum Public Relations. So I'm feeding them now. Now I'm feeding them. And I see a guy with a video camera at the base of the truck. He's taping me. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, we're taping the making of the commercial." He's taping my humiliation. He's going to go back to New York with the tape and show it to him, and they're going to go, "Is that Scott Redmond with the meatloaf? Oh, that poor son of a bitch." So I go back to the hotel. I call my sponsor, and I said, "Oh, we're getting the gift now. Oh, are we getting the gift? It's a miracle. It's a miracle. Miracle. This is miraculous. It's a miracle." And my sponsor said to me, "I guess God had enough writers and he needed a few cooks today." And then he said, "Scott, you told God you wanted to work for Ketchum and you forgot to tell him what you wanted to do." I'm 22 years sober. I'm 55 years old. My blood pressure is 118/68. I've never been healthier. I've never felt more handsome. I've never felt more in my life. My life is changing. My career is changing. My home life is changing. I'm going to be moving where I live. Tremendous sadness, tremendous joy in my life. Nowhere in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous does it say the road gets narrower. I'm not condemning that. I understand what people are saying, that they can't do all the bad crap they used to do. I understand that. I don't subscribe to it. I love what the book says. It says, "Come join us on the broad highway. Become part of the big idea, the great reality. Help us pack things into the mainstream of life. Become part of, join us on the firing line of life." It only talks about life becoming more inclusive, not exclusive. It talks about a big, sexy, robust, living, breathing relationship with a higher power in you. When I see my friends here, when I see Brent, when I see Beverly and George, and now my new friends, the people who I adore, who I've met here today and have been so generous to me. And when I see them, I feel this tremendous connection. And the crazy idea, the friendship idea, is that when you remove us from that, if you take Brent and I out of that, is that the connection disappears. That's the crazy friendship idea. The fellowship says no, that connection is the face and the breath of God. That's the face of God. My alcoholism has not gone below the horizon in 22 years because it's bolstered on that connective tissue. If I can just breathe on the ember of that connective tissue and encourage it in some other way, I'm in the bonus round. If you're new, I want to welcome you to Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to urge you to get involved in the cycle of surrender and commitment so you can move out of the cycle of spree and remorse. The good news is our problem mainly rests in our mind. I don't know of any other treatment from a fatal illness where the text about the treatment contains the sentence, "We absolutely insist on enjoying life." There's no book about cholera that says, "Cholera is a hoot. You'll love cholera. You'll meet other people with cholera. Then you'll meet people who just caught cholera. It just doesn't get any better than that. My sponsor used to say something so gorgeous. He used to say, Alcoholics Anonymous is the only recovery from a fatal illness that he knew of that leaves the sufferer in better condition than they were in before they contracted the disease. Wow, how incredibly true. If you're new here, I want to urge you to take this thing as seriously as you possibly can and go out there and have the time of your life. Welcome to AA. Welcome home. Thanks, guys.